Hey guys, tonight we're pulling back the curtains, literally on a world where bedsheets mattered almost as much as bloodlines. We're headed deep into the Tudor courts, where privacy was a luxury and bedroom access wasn't about intimacy. It was about power. This isn't a story of candlelit romance or fluffy pillows. No, you're about to walk into rooms where every glance, every whispered word, every towel handed to the king could decide your fortune or seal your downfall. And just a heads up, you probably won't survive this, not because of war or famine, but because you looked at someone the wrong way while they were putting on a silk nightshirt. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Oh, and tell me your city and what time it is for you right now. I always like knowing who's out there in the dark with me. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're standing in the heart of the Tudor court, Hampton Court Palace, maybe Whitehall, and you feel the chill of the stone floor seep through your slippers. It's early morning, the corridors are still dim, but the king is about to wake, and you somehow have earned the dubious honor of being allowed into his Privy Chamber. Not the Grand Council room, not the banqueting hall, the bedroom, his private guarded world, no velvet rope, no tour guide. Just the king, his thick feather mattress, and a handful of men so trusted their presence is basically a sign of divine favor. To get this close to the monarch, you don't need a sword, you need a comb, or maybe a clean linen shirt. Because here, in the Tudor world, power isn't forged on the battlefield. It's folded neatly at the foot of the king's bed. As the first rays of daylight creep through leaded glass windows, you help prepare the room. The smell is a mix of beeswax, wood smoke, and the faint tang of night sweat lingering on rich fabrics. Courtiers whisper as they straighten tapestries and tuck stray cushions. This is the inner sanctum, the Privy Chamber. And no, privy doesn't just mean toilet, although that is part of it. The word means private, personal, sacred. Here the king's world is stripped down, his crown is in a locked chest, his armor hangs in another room, but his authority? It pulses like blood in the veins of these few men allowed to see him before he's fully dressed. These aren't just flunkies, they're the gentlemen of the Privy Chamber, and they've got the king's ear, his trust, and sometimes his undivided attention while he's half naked and yawning. You start to realize something uncomfortable. It's less about the bed and more about who gets to see him when he's vulnerable. Henry V, in particular, understood the strategic goldmine of his own morning routine. He didn't even dress himself. He let you do it. Slowly, ritualistically. Every morning was a low-key coronation. Shirt, hose, codpiece, doublet, all handed over with the precision of a knight arming for battle. Except the battlefield was policy, marriage negotiations, and deciding who got which slice of dissolved monastery property. It's easy to romanticize these bedrooms as cozy retreats, but honestly, they're political war zones disguised with brocade. If you're in the king's good graces, you might get to help lace up his boots. If not, you're probably watching through a cracked door, praying no one notices you've been quietly replaced by a newer, shinier court favorite with better teeth and closer ties to someone important. And let's not forget, your presence here gives you information. The king's mood, the way he winces when he bends, the sigh he lets out after reading a letter from Spain. You're watching him become king in real time every single day, and that is intel you can trade for favors, land, or even protection when things go sideways. But it's not just about the king. The Privy Chamber is the eye of the storm where all factions collide. Noblemen want their sons in here, ambassadors bribe to get access. Wives watch anxiously, because if you're this close to the king, you're also dangerously close to seducing him, directly or politically. And sometimes, let's be honest, it was directly. You'd think a royal bedroom would be full of warmth and plush bedding, but mostly it's stiff, formal, and kind of cold. You're surrounded by symbolism. The bed is massive, maybe 6 feet across, draped in crimson or green, with embroidered initials above the pillows. It's not just for sleeping, it's a stage. You notice that even the sheets feel more ceremonial than comfortable. You might accidentally step on the wrong rug pattern and offend someone's great-uncle's crest. Every object has meaning, every moment is watched. Even if it's just by one sharp-eyed valley in the corner, will remember exactly how long it took you to hand over the king's nightcap. Oh, and the real kicker, you might not even get paid for this. Technically, being in the Privy Chamber is a job, but it's not about the money. It's about influence. It's the 16th century version of being verified on Instagram, but riskier, because a single misstep could land you in the tower. Here's the quirky bit. Sometimes your whole job might involve doing nothing, literally just sitting by the king's bed while he sleeps. You'd think that would be boring, but the tension is real. What if he wakes up and needs something? What if he mumbles in his sleep about a secret plan to invade France? What if you fall asleep and miss it? Now you're not just a servant, you're a liability. Even scholars today debate how much actual policy was formed in these intimate spaces versus formal councils. Some argue the bedroom was where real influence was brokered. The king, after all, was more candid when half-dressed. Others suggest the bedroom was more symbolic than strategic, and that the real power was in writing and seals, not whispers and morning routines. Either way, you start to see the truth. Being near the royal bed wasn't about comfort or closeness. It was about control. And every yawn, every slipper offered, was a move in a game most people didn't even know they were playing. The light has changed now. It's no longer the soft blue-grey of dawn. The fire has been stoked, the air warm and heavy with burning oak, and somewhere behind the drawn bed curtains the king stirs. This is it, the moment they call the king's rising. It's a ritual, a performance, a ceremony that feels almost religious, except instead of robes and incense, it's hose and tunics. You find yourself standing with the others, back straight, breaths held. No one speaks unless spoken to. You're about to see a man wake up, but it's treated like the rebirth of a god. There's a low rustle, a cough, and then a voice, groggy but unmistakably commanding, gives permission to enter. The curtains are drawn aside slowly, not flung open like in a play, but peeled back with careful hands. The king lies there, not glamorous, not especially majestic, more like a large, slightly sweaty man with sleep-crusted eyes and a half-folded nightshirt. But still, he's the king. He blinks, mutters something about how well, or poorly, he slept, and the ritual begins. One gentleman brings slippers, another sets out a basin and ewer for washing. Yet another offers a fresh linen shirt, which is accepted with a nod, as though it's a royal favor just to let someone help with your sleeves. And you're holding a towel, standing very still, waiting for the exact right moment to offer it without being too early or too slow. Every movement here is watched, every pause judged. One stumble and you're out, replaced by someone whose uncle married someone who shared a nursemaid with the queen's third cousin. And this towel, it's not just for drying the royal face, it's a symbol. You're touching skin that few ever see. You're allowed within arm's reach of the Tudor body. That's not just intimacy, it's proximity to policy. If the king grumbles about Parliament while patting down his cheeks and you're there to hear it, you now know more than most of the Privy Council. Maybe you shouldn't know, but now you do. These rising rituals were practiced to a precise rhythm. You learn them like choreography: slip on the undershirt while the basin is being removed, comb the beard before the boots arrive, stand clear when the sword belt is brought in. No talking, just glances, nods, and the occasional grunt of acknowledgement. The king is now half-dressed, still stretching and cracking joints, and already whispers about court business are beginning. A letter is slipped into his hand. He reads, he frowns. You watch his fingers tighten around the parchment. Someone's day is about to get very bad, and you just saw the first ripple. That's the thing. This isn't just waking up. This is power slowly assembling itself, layer by layer, until it stands upright and ready to rule. Every morning, the king is reconstituted like a sacred being. Nighttime vulnerability is stripped away, and in its place a gilded shell is constructed. Doublet, hose, cloak, chain. The man you helped roll out of bed is now your sovereign again, in full regalia. But for a brief window you saw something raw, something unguarded. And in a court obsessed with hierarchy, that moment can mean everything. This morning's ceremony, known as the lever, became highly formalized under the Tudors, especially with Henry VIII. Unlike his more aloof father, Henry relished the performance. He liked being at the center, the sun around which lesser stars revolved. But here's the quirky twist. He also genuinely enjoyed the banter. Once awake and halfway through dressing, he might crack a crude joke, tease one of his gentlemen, or ask who won the previous night's game of dice. You laugh when he does. Carefully, just enough, never louder than him. You laugh not because it's funny, but because laughter is a currency, and today you're trying to save your career. The scholarly debate here is surprisingly heated. Some historians insist the King's Rising was merely symbolic, a set piece with no real political function. Others argue it was a crucible of influence, where nobles could nudge decisions simply by catching the king in his bathrobe. The truth likely lies somewhere in between. It wasn't the only path to power, but it was certainly a useful shortcut. If you couldn't be a general or a chancellor, being the guy who picked out the king's codpiece was a pretty solid plan B. You start to notice patterns. The king's mood in the morning sets the tone for the entire day. If he wakes cheerful, laws pass, gifts are handed out, ambassadors are welcomed with banquets. If he wakes irritable, heads roll, literally. So being part of this inner circle means you're also the court's emotional barometer. People outside these walls will ask, "Was His Majesty cheerful this morning?" before deciding whether to approach him about their inheritance dispute or a quest for a noble title. And you, holder of towels and watcher of royal yawns, become a kind of secret oracle. But this access is fickle. One day you're offering a velvet doublet and getting a smile in return. The next day the king says nothing, doesn't meet your eye, and someone else takes your place. You're not fired, yet. But you've been noticed. Or worse, unnoticed. In the Tudor court, irrelevance is death by 1,000 yawns. And there's another layer. The politics among the gentlemen themselves. They're not your friends, they're rivals. Smiling in the morning, watching your every move. You might share jokes now, but one word in the wrong ear, one small betrayal, and you're gone. Maybe worse than gone. Maybe questioned, imprisoned, or blackmailed. You hear stories about others who got too close to the king, saw too much, and were encouraged to retire to the countryside, permanently. Still, as you help fasten the final belt loop and step back, you feel something strange, a thrill almost. You're part of a centuries-old ceremony, half liturgy, half performance art. The air smells like rose oil and leather. The king's boots gleam, and he, finally upright and adorned, looks every bit the monarch the public expects. But you remember the way he rubbed his eyes just minutes ago. You remember the offhanded sigh about his leg pain. You remember that behind all the pageantry, he's still just a man. And for now, you're the one holding his towel. Now that the king is dressed and walking with slow, ceremonial steps toward the presence chamber, the room behind him, his private sanctuary, goes strangely still. A fire crackles with no one paying attention to it. A scent of lavender, water, and wool hangs in the air. You linger, watching the others clear away linens, brush out the rug, and fold garments with ritual precision. But the real drama never quite happens while the king is present. No, the thickest plots, the heavier silences, they all live in the moments just after he's left the room. You glance toward the bed, still slightly rumpled from where the monarch had lain minutes earlier. It dominates the space like an altar, its frame intricately carved and gilded, draped with curtains heavy enough to block out both light and eavesdroppers. The bedding itself is a fortress, layers of embroidered covers, sheets of fine Holland linen, and under that a mattress stuffed with feathers so soft it feels like a trap. This isn't a place of rest. This is where whispers stick like candle soot. This is where politics hides in plain sight. See, the Tudor bed was never just for sleeping. It was a political prop, a coded message, and sometimes even a makeshift stage. These beds were built for visibility, positioned with purpose, surrounded by furniture that gave the impression of intimacy, that allowed for plenty of watchful eyes. You might find yourself helping to arrange the pillows before a guest is brought in, not for lounging, but to kneel beside it and whisper something conspiratorial through the gauze of privacy. It's performative secrecy. Everyone knows you're talking in private, but they also know you're doing it here, where it matters. The fact is, there's something almost absurdly powerful about being in this room, and dangerous. Once inside the Privy Chamber, your presence itself becomes a political statement. You're either in favor or about to be devoured by those who are. The bed, surrounded by those thick curtains and ever-watchful servants, becomes the axis of shifting power. A nod from the king while seated on the edge of it might earn you a knighthood. A look of disapproval during his nightly prayers, well, you'd best start packing. You start to see how access to the royal bedchamber isn't just privilege, it's currency. People trade favors, gamble alliances, and risk their reputations for a moment inside these walls. And the curtains, they're not just fabric, they're shields, secrets, status symbols. They're drawn for reasons that often have nothing to do with sleep. And here's the uncomfortable truth. The thicker the curtain, the murkier the politics. One morning, you watch a lesser noble, a cousin of someone important, ushered into the chamber with excessive ceremony. He's nervous, bowing too deeply, sweating through his doublet. The gift is handed to the king. There's a moment of stiff exchange, then a private word beside the bed. You don't hear the conversation, but you do notice the way the king's expression changes. Later that afternoon, word spreads. The noble's debt is forgiven, and his rival mysteriously loses a court post. Coincidence? Maybe. But in the Tudor world, those little curtain conversations are rarely innocent. There's also a kind of jealousy that simmers here, thick and sour. You see it in the way one gentleman glances sideways when another is invited to assist with the king's nightcap. You hear it in the clipped tones of a chamberlain who used to be first in, last out, and now stands near the doorway like a scolded dog. You realize that access is both a blessing and a curse. Once you've been inside the bedchamber, it's all the more humiliating to be shut out. And yes, sometimes that exclusion is literal. The king could close his curtains at night and signal exactly who was welcome and who wasn't. It wasn't always about sex either. Sometimes it was a silent punishment. You've seen noblemen spend hours waiting outside the chamber doors, faking casual conversation, all while hoping the king might send for them. Spoiler, he usually doesn't. Quirky detail time. Royal beds were often checked before the king entered them, for intruders, for weapons, for unwanted surprises. So you might find yourself part of a nightly search party, running your hands along the frame, peeking under the mattress, double-checking the sheets. Not because anyone really expects to find an assassin in the bed, but because skipping the check would be unthinkable. It's ritual, and ritual here is everything. What fascinates you most, though, is how these rooms lie to you. They pretend to be restful, soft, sacred, but in reality they're pressure chambers. The curtains don't muffle sound, they concentrate it. You once overheard a full-fledged political negotiation taking place in hushed voices just behind the headboard. Titles were being traded like poker chips, while a sleepy king nodded from his pillow. Scholars today still argue over how much of state policy was shaped within these velvety chambers. Was the bedchamber simply the reward for those already in favor, or the tool that got them there? Some argue that it was mostly symbolic, a decorative appendage to the real machinery of government. Others point to the astonishing frequency with which Privy Chamber staff rose rapidly in wealth, title, and power, suggesting that proximity equaled opportunity. The truth, as usual, is likely tangled somewhere in between the sheets. By late morning, when the chamber is cleared and the king is off to council, you notice how carefully everything is reset. The bed smoothed, the curtains fluffed, the basin emptied and polished. No trace of emotion or argument remains. The room is scrubbed of evidence, made sterile again, ready for the next performance. It's eerie almost, like wiping a crime scene clean before the inspectors arrive. But you still carry the echo of the morning's whispers. You still remember who lingered by the bed, whose hand brushed too close to the king's, who looked too eager or not eager enough. You file it away, mentally sorting allies from threats. And then you step out of the chamber, back into the larger palace, eyes adjusting to the brighter corridors, but already longing for the darkness behind those curtains. Because once you've been in the room where the bed is more than a bed, where privacy is a weapon, and ritual is a mask, you're never quite the same. You've glimpsed the soft underbelly of power, and if you're not careful, it will swallow you whole. It starts with the sound of boots, soft ones padded for silence, moving across the floor just outside the king's private chamber. You know those footsteps by now. They're not guards, not servants. They belong to the men who sleep closest to the king, sometimes just feet away. They're the gentlemen of the Privy Chamber, and tonight, you're one of them. Not just allowed to enter the royal bedchamber, you sleep inside it. Not in the king's bed, of course, but in a pallet on the floor, tucked behind a folding screen, your breath sinking to the quiet rhythm of royal dreams. If you can sleep at all. Because this isn't about rest. This is about presence. It's about trust. A strange, almost unsettling intimacy that would seem laughable in today's world. Imagine sleeping near the president or a world leader, feet away, dressed alert, pretending to snore while your ears pick up everything. Now imagine doing it in a room lit only by a dying fire, surrounded by velvet shadows, and men who would slit each other's throats for the chance to carry the king's cloak at sunrise. Welcome to your new normal. You lie still, eyes half shut, listening. The king snores softly, his breathing uneven thanks to his lingering leg ulcer, which smells faintly metallic, even under the ointments. Somewhere beyond the curtains, a coal shifts in the hearth. Another gentleman coughs. The silence between these small noises stretches out like parchment, thin, tense, ready to rip at the smallest mistake. You roll onto your side, not for comfort, but to relieve the ache of stillness in your shoulder. Your hand brushes the hilt of your small dagger. Not for fighting, just tradition. Everyone sleeps armed, even if you'll never draw it. By sleeping in the king's chamber, you've passed the ultimate test. You're seen as safe. Not just safe from ambition, but safe from gossip, safe from sudden bursts of conscience. You've been watched, vetted, and chosen, not for your loyalty alone, but for your ability to keep your mouth shut. You know how many women visit the king, and when. You know how many times he gets up to relieve himself. You even know what he mumbles when he dreams. And that, right there, is the power. Because no document, no signature, no great proclamation carries as much weight as knowing what the king fears in the quiet hours. You've heard him wake in a cold sweat after dreaming about Anne Boleyn. You've seen him weep silently on the anniversary of Jane Seymour's death. You've watched him reread letters from his daughters, lips moving silently as though conjuring their voices in the stillness. You don't speak of these moments, not ever, but they mark you. Give you an edge over every courtier scrambling outside the chamber door. It's strange, though, because while your proximity gives you power, it also traps you. The gentlemen of the Privy Chamber are closer to the king than his own council, closer than most of his wives by the end of their marriages, and yet you have no real freedom. You don't get to leave court. You don't travel unless the king travels. If he stays up late drinking, so do you. If he falls into a foul mood, you have to soothe it. Sometimes by laughing at an off-color joke, sometimes by sitting silently and enduring the weight of his silence. There's an ongoing joke among the gentlemen. We're not servants. We're hostages with combs. And it's not far from the truth. The chamber's furniture shifts over time as kings change. Some monarchs prefer heavy carved chests and religious icons everywhere. Others opt for sleek surfaces and imported cushions, but the bed always remains the same in its meaning. Huge, central, elevated, draped, and under it, quite literally, your bed. Because yes, sometimes you sleep under the king's bed. The design allows for it. A hidden pallet tucked out of view, where the most trusted gentleman can lie at the ready, like a loyal hound beneath the master's table. The first time it happens, it's humiliating. The second time, you don't even blink. Of course, the setup isn't just for protection. It's for show. There's a deliberate theatricality to it, this royal vulnerability paired with a chosen few who can witness it. To the public, the king is a distant figure in gold and armor. But to you, he's a man who snores, who talks in his sleep, who sometimes passes gas with surprising force. These details don't make you less reverent. Oddly, they make you more devoted. Because you don't serve the myth, you serve the man. Sometimes, the quiet of the chamber breaks with drama. A messenger arrives at midnight. The king's sleep is disturbed by a letter from abroad or word of a rebellion in the north. He sits up, calls for light. You scramble up from your pallet, candle in hand, robe thrown over your tunic, Heart racing not with fear, but with anticipation. A crisis is a chance to prove your worth. If you're the one who fetches the right person, soothes the king's temper, delivers the next command without error, you've earned more in 5 minutes than some lords earn in 5 years. And yet, the politics are never simple. Every man in the Privy Chamber is both colleague and competitor. You'll dress the king, bathe him, wait by his bedside, but you also keep a mental tally of favors granted, smiles received, names whispered during moments of drowsy trust. You overhear each other's private conversations with the king, then pretend not to. You live half your life in silence and the other half in smiling deception. Historians still debate whether this inner circle had too much power. Was it right for unelected men, chosen more for charm and discretion than for birth or merit, to wield so much influence? Or was this closeness a necessary counterweight to the more public machinery of statecraft? Some argue that the gentleman acted as a stabilizing force, loyal, consistent, emotionally invested in the king's health and moods. Others say they became parasites, whispering flattery into royal ears while undermining everyone outside the bedchamber door. What's undeniable is the sheer amount of statecraft that took place between those bedposts. Wars didn't start in the throne room. They started here, in the hush of candlelight, in the muttered suggestions over warm wine, in the moments when a half-dressed king nodded and said, "Do it." Tonight, though, there's no war, just the faint hiss of the fire, the rhythmic snore of monarchy, and the dull ache in your back from the too short pallet. You shift again, careful not to wake anyone. In the dark, you can just make out the shape of the king's bed, its heavy curtains closed, its secret safe, for now. And you lie there, staring at the ceiling, realizing that sleep is almost impossible in a place where power breathes inches from your face. You never think your job will include assisting the king with his bodily functions, but then again, nothing about Tudor court life prepares you for how close can get. One day you're handing him gloves, the next you're in charge of the chamber pot, and not just any pot, the one reserved for His Majesty's daily deposit. Congratulations, you've officially become the Groom of the Stool. You pause the first time you hear the title, Groom of the what now? It sounds ridiculous, maybe even demeaning, but the truth is far weirder and more powerful than you'd ever expect. Because yes, you are now in charge of the king's most private and unfiltered moments. You fetch the stool, a cushioned wooden contraption, with a discreet hole and a fine porcelain bowl tucked inside. You heat water for washing. You select the linen cloths. You stand nearby, never staring but never out of earshot, waiting for the signal that it's time to assist. It's absurd, isn't it? The man rules England and you help him poop, but the closer you get to it, the more you realize there's nothing absurd about it at all. In this job, proximity equals trust. The Groom of the Stool isn't a joke. He's a gatekeeper, a confidant, and sometimes a manipulator, with more court access than the Lord Chancellor. You hear everything. The king complains, he vents, he muses out loud. He might even ask your opinion while his legs are dangling and his dignity, quite literally, is at half-mast. What do you say? Always something careful, always something useful. The groom is never idle and never forgets. You begin to appreciate the subtle power of this ridiculous little office. You're allowed to touch the king when no one else can. You wash him, you wipe him. And because of that, you become part of a strange inner circle no one outside can understand. You share in his weakness, his humanity. That changes things. He might not weep openly during war councils, but he'll sigh deeply after a hard night's stew and mutter truths into the air that he'd never admit on the throne. This might explain why, over time, grooms of the stool end up loaded with titles, land, and influence. The position has humble roots, sure, but in the Tudor court it becomes something rare and dangerous. A role that combines personal care with direct access. Think about it. The person who manages your bowels also manages your mood. And the person who manages your mood eventually shapes your policy. It's not all privilege, though. You're expected to be invisible when necessary. If the king is in a bad way, doubled over with stomach pain or unable to perform, you never mention it. Not to your fellow grooms, not to your family, not even in your diary. The walls of the stool closet are thick, but gossip is thicker. A rumor about royal constipation could ripple out and cause international embarrassment. Seriously. One missed bowel movement and suddenly there's speculation about the king's health, his virility, even the line of succession. Sometimes you find yourself defending his honor in the strangest ways. No, His Majesty is in excellent health, you assure a whispering courtier. You don't say, he just spent 20 minutes on the stool, groaning like a cursed monk, because that, while true, is treason adjacent. You learn quickly that the chamber is a space of code and euphemism. No one says the king is using the toilet. They say he is at his ease, or he seeks his quiet. Occasionally, if someone's feeling poetic, he is in retreat. And while he's retreating, you're standing outside the curtain or screen, ready with warm water, a folded towel, and a mind like a steel trap. Because the moment he starts talking, even while doing the most natural act imaginable, you'd better be listening. It could be something trivial, or it could be a whispered change in the will. There's a bizarre pride that comes with this job. You know things no one else does. You have the king's ear because you've already seen every other part of him, and you use it quietly, shrewdly. You pass suggestions, offer gentle encouragements, relay carefully selected comments from others. You become a funnel for information and a filter, because not everything the king hears should actually reach his brain. You learn to polish the ugly, blunt the sharp, and shape the world he sees, all while holding a wash basin. And of course, you can never let your own disgust show. You must be cheerful, steady-handed, immune to shame. There's a ritual to it now. You prepare the stool, you step back as he sits, you wait, you offer conversation only if prompted. When he's done, you clean everything silently, efficiently, you bow, you withdraw. Outside the chamber, your status rises faster than anyone expects. Nobles seek your favor. Ambassadors linger near your table at meals. Even queens, subtle in their glances, acknowledge your position with faint nods. You're now one of the few who can say, without irony, I know the king better than his own ministers. There's even a quirky side note you pick up one night during an especially awkward dinner. One of the French envoys jokes, a little too loudly, that the English king is the only monarch whose backside determines foreign policy. Everyone laughs, you don't. Because the truth isn't funny, it's strategic. If the king can't sit on horseback, he can't ride to war. If his digestion's off, he cancels councils. If his belly swells with too much claret and beef, Parliament waits. Historians still fight over whether the groom of the stool was a glorified valet or a shadow politician. Some argue the position was entirely ceremonial by the end of the Tudor period. Others point to documented evidence, letters, diary entries, royal edicts, that suggest these grooms had shocking levels of influence. After all, if you were the one standing next to the king when he made up his mind about a marriage, a military campaign, or a bishopric, then in a way, you helped decide the fate of nations. Tonight, as you fold the final linen and rinse the porcelain pot, you pause for a moment. The chamber is quiet, the fire low. The king snores faintly. No one else is awake. You look at your reflection in the polished brass basin and think, not for the first time, that you've become something far stranger than you ever imagined. Part nurse, part spy, part confessor, part puppet master, all because you held the towel. There's something different about serving in the Queen's chambers. The lighting is softer, the voice is quieter. The floors, you notice, are warmer underfoot. Less echo, less clatter. But don't let the calm fool you. This room is every bit as political as the king's bedchamber, maybe even more so. You don't just carry linens here. You carry knowledge, glances, secrets hidden in gestures that outsiders would never notice. You've been stationed here tonight in the Queen's Privy Chamber, and already you understand that being close to a Tudor queen isn't about gossip or glamour. It's about rules, hundreds of them. Rules of proximity, rules of speech, rules of touch. And of those, the last is the most important. You do not touch the queen, not unless it's required, and even then, only under strict supervision. It sounds odd. How can you serve someone you can't touch? But Tudor queens weren't just royal wives. They were symbols of fertility, virtue, and divine order. Their bodies weren't their own. They were the property of the dynasty. which makes you effectively a steward of sacred flesh. Congratulations again. You notice it first with Anne Boleyn. She moves like she's being watched even when she isn't. Her gaze is sharp, alert, always measuring. You're one of the ladies in waiting now, technically a chamberer, allowed to help with her clothing, her hair, her bedding, but never alone, always in pairs, sometimes in threes, as if the queen might try to bolt or whisper state secrets if left unwatched. You help her into her nightgown, laced from the back with ribbons stiff from starch and perfume. The fabric is cool in your hands, her skin warmer than you expect. She never thanks you out loud. But her glance lingers, just long enough to remind you. She's not unaware. Serving a Tudor queen means understanding her cycle, literally. You keep track of her courses, record her appetite, even note changes in her sleep. Why? Because pregnancy is more than a personal matter. It's a political earthquake. Every missed period could mean a future heir. Every cramp, a national disappointment. You remember the way the whole room went quiet the last time Anne fainted? No one said anything, just paused. If you exchanged looks, you could hear the rustle of her gown as she was helped to a seat. And behind that, something colder. The machinery of dynasty whirring into motion, considering what would happen if she were carrying a son, or if she wasn't. Touch, when it happens, is clinical. You help bathe her once a week, though that's more symbolic than sanitary. The water isn't exactly hot, and the soap, soft lye with rose oil, is more about fragrance than function. Still, you hold the cloth. You help her balance on the slippery wooden stool. You dry her feet, and all the while other eyes watch. There are always witnesses. Even when she bathes, especially when she bathes, the queen is not supposed to be touched by any man but the king. This rule gets blurred during childbirth and medical emergencies, of course, but in daily life it stands. If the doctor must examine her, a female attendant is always present, and you, not a friend, not a sister, but something in between, become the human buffer between her vulnerability and the world. You realize quickly that affection is rare here, but trust is gold. Earn it, and you'll have more influence than a dozen dukes. There's a strange, almost theatrical intimacy in the Queen's chamber. You sit at her feet during embroidery. You brush her hair while she stares into the fire, miles away. Sometimes she talks, to no one in particular. Little bursts of thought, complaints about the ambassador's bad breath, the comment on a dream she had. You learn to listen without reacting. Never agree too quickly, never correct her, but always remember. These murmured comments can become court currency by morning. One evening Anne snaps her fingers and orders a certain lady out of the room. No reason given. The woman hesitates, curtsies, and leaves. You feel the temperature shift. Anne turns to you, her voice low. Don't trust her. She speaks French only when it suits her. That's it. No further explanation. But you know enough to pass it on to the right ears, and soon enough, that lady's position is reconsidered, and her brother's trade grant quietly revoked. All because she picked the wrong moment to show off her language skills. You begin to see how access to the Queen's body is also access to her mind. Her moods are read like weather patterns. Is she pale? She must be upset. Is she flushed? Could be hope or fever. Did she eat less at supper? Is she in love or in danger? You start to chart her behaviors the way others chart politics, because in many ways, her body is politics, especially when she's expected to produce a male heir. A quirky tradition you witness involves the monthly womb wine. It's a blend of spiced red wine, herbs like rue and mugwort, and a dash of cinnamon. It's meant to stimulate fertility or balance the humors. You're the one who prepares it. You're told to serve it in a specific goblet, always at twilight. Whether it works is anyone's guess, but it makes everyone feel like they're doing something. Sometimes, that illusion is all anyone wants. You can't help but notice how different it feels here compared to the king's chamber. There, everything is command and conquest, direct, loud, ceremonial. Here, the energy is subterranean. Power is wielded in whispers, glances, and absences. The queen might be the second most important person in the realm, but she rarely speaks directly. She doesn't need to. Her servants speak for her. Her silences shout. There's debate among modern historians about how much real power Tudor queens held. Were they pawns in the marriage game, or did they rule from behind the veil? Scholars still argue over whether women like Anne Boleyn or Catherine Parr influenced state policy directly, or whether their presence merely softened the edges of male politics. But from where you're standing, holding a silver basin while the Queen dips her fingers into rosewater, the answer seems clear. Influence doesn't have to be loud. It just has to be close. And you? You're closer than most. You've seen her in pain, in fury, in joy. You've seen her bleed, cry, laugh, and curse. You've held her hair as she vomited during early pregnancy. You've rubbed oil into her ankles when they swelled from standing too long. You've watched as she took the king's hand with practiced grace, even after he humiliated her in public. That night, as you tuck her lavender sachet into her pillow and smooth the coverlet, she looks at you for just a moment. "Do you think it will be a boy?" she asks, quiet as breath. You're not sure whether she wants reassurance or honesty. You give her both. "I think England is ready for one," you say. She closes her eyes. "So am I." And in that moment, you feel the weight of an entire kingdom pressing down on one small, tired, extraordinary body. The palace is unusually restless tonight. You can feel it in the way people walk, too fast or too quietly. There's a tension in the air, thick and silent like storm clouds gathering over the Thames. You're back in the King's Wing now, moving between chambers with an empty tray and full ears, when you pass two men speaking in French outside the Great Hall. Their voices drop when you approach. One glances at you, then looks away too quickly. That's the thing about court. There's always a conversation happening just out of reach, and sometimes the real power lies in pretending not to notice while catching every word. Tonight, that edge of the curtain behavior is more intense than usual. There are rumors. Something about a letter intercepted, a visit that wasn't logged, and the king, they say, is in a foul mood. Not a bad mood, a foul one, which is worse. The difference is subtle but vital. A bad mood might cost someone a post. A foul one, that could end in blood. You step into the Privy Chamber and find the bed untouched, the curtains still drawn wide open from this morning's rising. Strange. Usually the bedding would have been smoothed by now, prepped for nightfall, lavender sprigs tucked between the sheets. But the king hasn't come back here yet. You spot his boots under a chair but no sign of his person. Only a few of the gentlemen of the chamber linger, talking in coded phrases, voices low and stilted. Then you hear it. The clink of a goblet, a muted laugh from behind the tapestries and a woman's voice. Too bold, too close. Your heart stutters. She wasn't supposed to be here. She doesn't belong to the Queen's household. She doesn't belong to any official list. But you've seen her before, not often. Always passing quickly, head down, face partially veiled, mistress of someone important, or perhaps no one at all, except the king. You inch closer, pretending to adjust a cushion. Behind the tapestry, shadows move. The woman laughs again, lower now. Then silence, the kind that hums. You look away. You've seen nothing, heard nothing, because knowing too much, especially about that, is the fastest route to the tower if you're lucky. This isn't just some midnight dalliance. In Tudor courts, the king's bedroom is a battlefield. Every mistress, every unofficial visitor is a political grenade waiting to explode. One whispered secret during pillow talk could undo a treaty. One casual suggestion might shape the future of the Privy Council. You've heard stories of favorites rising overnight just because they dared to tell the king what he wanted to hear, while his head was still on the pillow. The next morning, the woman is gone. No one speaks of her. The bedding is freshly changed. The king emerges from the chamber in high spirits, asking for music. That's how you know something happened. Henry VIII doesn't ask for lutes and harps unless he's just had something, or someone, to celebrate. The court shifts on its axis. Factions realign. And you, quietly changing the water in the basin, already see whose fortunes are rising and whose are circling the drain. That afternoon, a well-dressed courtier, Lord P, is abruptly reassigned to duties far from London. No warning. No cause stated. But you remember seeing him in the corridor near the king's chamber last night. Coincidence? Maybe. But you doubt it. The timing is too perfect. and the silence around it too sharp. That's how the real betrayals happen here. Not in public, not in council chambers, but in shadows. In whispers shared between the sheets, and it's not always lovers. Sometimes it's friends. Sometimes it's servants. Sometimes it's a groom standing too close when a drunken confession slips out at 2 in the morning. And once it's out, once the words are spoken, there's no pulling them back. You've known men ruined over a single bedroom comment. One was just a footman, overheard joking that the king's legs smelled like death. A harmless jest, except it reached the wrong ears, and within days, he was gone. Quietly removed. No trial, just erased. There's something deeply dangerous about intimacy here. It confuses lines, makes people think they're safe. The bed, after all, is supposed to be a place of trust. But in Tudor courts, it's where trust is weaponized. Say the wrong thing in the wrong moment, and you won't even see the blow coming. The bed might cradle you one night, and become your coffin the next. Scholars still argue about how much influence the king's lovers truly held. Were they just ornaments, or actual architects of policy? Some point to Jane Seymour, whose soft voice and compliant manner supposedly helped patch relations with Princess Mary. Others note that Anne Boleyn, in the flush of her favor, shaped religious reform and foreign alliances. But then again, if influence could be measured in proximity, why did so many favorites fall so fast? The answer, you suspect, lies in the nature of the game. Bedroom access is power, but it's power borrowed, not earned. It exists only as long as desire does, and desire is a fickle, violent, easily bored thing. Still, some wield it well. You remember one woman, Margaret, a lady of the court who never officially entered the king's bed but managed, through well-placed smiles and perfectly timed comments, to make herself indispensable. She never touched the king, not once, that her words lingered in his ears long after others were dismissed. She was promoted, married off advantageously, and eventually vanished into a comfortable life in the countryside, untouched by scandal. She played the game and survived. A rare trick. Tonight, as you extinguish the final candle in the Privy Chamber and check the lock on the inner door, you wonder who's listening now, who's waiting just outside, hoping to be summoned, hoping their presence behind the curtain will mean something come morning. You smooth the sheets, adjust the pillow. The king will return soon, possibly alone, possibly not. You step back, hands clasped, eyes down. In this room, the difference between lover, spy, and traitor is measured in whispers. The bed is more than ready tonight. You've pulled the heavy covers tight, tucking the corners with a precision that borders on devotional. The sheets are starched to near stiffness. Not that the king will notice, not directly, but he'll feel it. The subtle resistance of the linen, the faint scent of rosemary and soap. The small signs that things are exactly as they should be. The ceremony of the royal bedchamber doesn't begin with anyone sleeping. It begins with a full-scale production, and you somehow have a front-row seat and a walk-on role in a ritual where sleep is practically an afterthought. First, the processional. The king doesn't just wander off to bed when he's tired. There's a system, a slow transition from public to private, marked by a change in his clothing, his company, and even the lighting. You notice how the torches along the corridor are lowered gradually as he makes his way from the presence chamber toward his apartments. The flames dimmed to cast long shadows instead of harsh light. You and the other attendants move with him like an echo, silent and fluid. Everything is done quietly now. There's no need for speeches or pageantry. Everyone understands the sanctity of this hour. Inside the outer chamber, nobles cluster politely, lingering in hopes of a casual word or a meaningful glance. The closer you get to the inner sanctum, the fewer people remain. This is the great filtering mechanism of the Tudor court. The deeper you go, the fewer the witnesses, the greater the power, until finally the king passes into the Privy Chamber, and only a handful of trusted men remain. You are among them tonight. You've earned the right not just to serve, but to see. There's a specific order to everything. First, the king removes his outer garments. Not all at once. This isn't a costume change. It's a ceremony. One gentleman unclasps the mantle. Another folds it, perfectly, and places it on a chair with carved lion heads. Then the sword belt is removed, passed carefully to the master of the robes. The king is slowly unwrapped, peeled down to his bare dignity. Even his shirt, wrinkled from the day's wear, is taken and replaced with a fresh nightshirt laid out ahead of time, warmed slightly by the fire. And through all of this, the bed waits. You glance at it now and again, half out of reverence, half out of obligation. Its placement in the room is deliberate, centered, slightly raised on a low platform with 4 thick posts rising like columns and supporting a carved canopy overhead. The curtains tonight are drawn open, tied back with golden cords. The pillows have been fluffed. The mattress, a mix of straw and feathers, has been turned. Even the bolster has been plumped and rotated to ensure the king's head rests on the cool side. Yes, even kings prefer that. You remember something odd about this part of the ritual. The king rarely climbs into bed alone. Not that he's escorted like a child, but the presence of others, servants, attendants, sometimes even nobles, is normal. They stay until he settles in. They wait until he gives the command. Only then do they file out, backs bowed, leaving him in the velvet silence of royal solitude. You wonder if it ever feels truly private. Tonight, he lingers beside the bed, one hand resting on the bedpost, thumb tapping idly. He's distracted, thinking perhaps about a petition that crossed his desk earlier, or an ambassador's tone during supper. Whatever it is, he hasn't let it go. You stand perfectly still, holding the candle just high enough to keep the shadows off his face. He doesn't speak, then you don't prompt. But you're certain of one thing. Tomorrow's mood will be shaped by this very moment. How he sleeps, how he wakes, what dreams enter his chamber tonight. He finally turns, settles onto the bed, and eases himself under the covers with a practiced grace. You step forward with the final part of the ceremony, the bed curtain closure. One by one you release the cords, letting the heavy fabric fall into place. Not all at once, never that. You move clockwise, drawing the curtain slowly, carefully. The sound it makes, thick, whispery, like distant thunder, is familiar now, comforting even. You're closing off the outside world, sealing the king in his cocoon. The scholars call it curtaining the sovereign, a moment that marks the transition from ruler to resting man. But even in this moment, the symbolism is layered. To close the curtain is to protect him, to obscure him, to shield him from both threat and expectation. It's also a message: he is no longer available, not to subjects, not to wives, not to spies, not until morning. Except, of course, for you and the other few permitted to remain in the chamber. You settle onto your small cot, shoes off, cloak draped over your shoulders. The fire is low now, the embers glowing like a heartbeat across the room. The sound of the king's breathing comes soft and steady through the curtains. Occasionally he mutters. Sometimes he shifts, the mattress creaking beneath him. And in the quiet, your mind drifts back to one of the stranger quirks of this ritual, the inspection of the bed itself. Earlier, before the king entered, you performed the formal check, lifting the sheets, feeling beneath the mattress, tapping the bedposts. It's not just paranoia. There have been real threats before. Daggers, listening devices of the 16th century variety. Even cursed objects. Nothing tonight, of course. But the ritual continues because it must. And there's the scholarly debate too. Some argue that the ceremony of the bedchamber existed solely to reinforce royal mystique. That by turning sleep into theatre, the monarchy maintained its aura of divinity. Others claim the ceremony had practical uses, controlling access, solidifying hierarchies, maintaining security. You've lived it long enough to know it's probably both. A man is most vulnerable when asleep. What better way to protect him than to wrap that vulnerability in velvet and ritual? Sometimes, as you lie there in your cot, you wonder what the king dreams about. Is it war? A younger version of himself riding into battle with a thinner waist and a cleaner conscience? Or maybe it's simpler. Memories of childhood, flashes of his mother's hand, the smell of spring gardens at Eltham Palace. He'll never ask, and he'll never say. But in the hours between the curtains closing and the sun's rise, the king is just a body beneath a blanket, and you, invisible again, are the one who keeps that blanket folded exactly right. The room is warm, close and dark, sealed off with thick tapestries and shuttered windows. You'd think this would be a space for quiet reflection or sleep, but no. Tonight, the Queen is in labor, and you're one of the lucky few permitted to witness what should be the most private moment of a woman's life. Except nothing is private when the continuation of a dynasty depends on the contents of your womb. They call this ritual confinement, though that's a generous term. The Queen has been in here for weeks, secluded from the court, surrounded by soft lighting, silks, midwives, and ladies-in-waiting, who barely speak above a whisper. It's meant to be peaceful, holy even. But you've been in this chamber for hours now, and it feels less like a sacred rite, and more like a pressure cooker wrapped in brocade. No men are allowed past the outer chamber, not even the king, especially not the king. The women here know what's at stake, and their hands are quick, sure, seasoned by practice and the quiet terror that follows every Tudor birth. One wrong turn, one prolonged silence, and everything could end, twice. A dead queen, a dead heir, the line broken. You shift in your seat perched on a narrow bench near the back wall. Candles flicker beside you, their wax pooling in shallow brass saucers. The Queen is in a canopied bed, half sitting, half laying, her face pale and damp, hair loose around her shoulders. She's gritting her teeth between contractions, her fingers white-knuckled on the carved bedpost. No screaming. Queens do not scream. They breathe heavily, they wince, they weep, if they must, but they do not wail, at least not while anyone's watching. Earlier in the day, you helped hang more cloth around the room. No natural light is permitted. Sunlight is considered dangerous during labor, too sharp, too full of male energy. Instead, the windows have been blocked with layers of velvet and linen, turning the entire chamber into a sort of feminine cave. Even the floor has been covered with soft carpets to mute sound. The result? A heavy, womb-like stillness, broken only by the Queen's occasional gasps and the midwife's murmured instructions. The symbolism is everywhere. This is the most literal expression of Tudor dynastic power, a woman giving birth in darkness. While the rest of the kingdom holds its breath just outside the door, you know that as soon as the child is born, the royal physicians and bishops and half the nobility will be clamoring to know if it's a boy, because it has to be a boy. England needs an heir, the king needs an heir, and the Queen, well, she needs to survive this. You've already helped with the birthing trinkets. Charms and relics hang from the bed frame. A tiny silver cross, a ring that supposedly belonged to the Virgin Mary, a ribbon embroidered with blessings in Latin. You even tucked a folded parchment under the pillow, an herbal recipe for easing pain, scrawled in shaky handwriting and passed down from someone's great-aunt, who swore it saved her during her 5th labor. Whether it works or not is irrelevant. It makes everyone feel slightly less helpless. And then there's the silence. Outside this room, people are talking, speculating, betting, worrying. But in here, the silence is thick. It's not just for concentration, it's ceremonial, as if any noise might disturb the delicate balance of life and death happening under the covers. At one point, the Queen turns her head and meets your eyes. It's just for a second, but there's something raw there. Not royal, not poised, just human. Scared. You wonder if she even wants this. This audience. This constant pressure to produce a male heir with half the kingdom lurking outside her curtains. There's a burst of motion then, a change in the room's energy. One of the midwives gestures sharply. Another lady rises to fetch fresh cloths. The Queen grips the bedpost harder, her mouth forming a silent scream. You rise instinctively, unsure if you're needed but ready just the same. And then, there it is, a wet cry, small and sharp and unmistakable. The room doesn't erupt into cheers. No one dares, not yet. The midwives lean in, working quickly. The baby is cleaned, wrapped, examined. You strain to hear the words, trying to catch a clue before anyone says it's loud. And then someone murmurs, just loud enough. A girl. Your heart sinks before you even realize it. Not because she isn't beautiful, she is. Not because she won't be loved, she might be, but because she isn't a boy. And in Tudor England, that means she is a disappointment. The Queen hasn't reacted yet. She hasn't been told. Or maybe she knows. Maybe she heard the silence after the birth cry. Maybe she's known all along. Do you watch as the infant is placed gently in her arms? The queen looks down, exhausted, and smiles, just barely. Then you feel something in your chest twist. Because this isn't just a child, this is a verdict, a prophecy, a question mark that might end in ruin. There's a debate among scholars about whether these confinement rooms were empowering or oppressive. On the one hand, they gave women space, physical, emotional, to bond and support each other away from the male gaze. On the other, they reinforced the idea that a woman's worth was in her ability to birth sons behind closed doors. You're living that contradiction right now, watching a powerful queen be reduced for a moment to her biology. You help change the sheets after, quietly, respectfully. You see the blood, you smell it. It's not gruesome, it's life, raw and unedited, but it never fails to humble you. This is the bed where monarchs are made and unmade. Soon the court will learn of the birth. The bells may still ring, but not with the same joy. There will be whispers about the queen's health, about her usefulness, about whether the king's eye might wander now. You can already hear the speculative tones in the hallway. The same ones you've heard before. You fold the linens, smoothing the edge, then step back into the warm, dim silence. Baby whimpers, the queen sighs. The midwives begin the prayers of thanks, and you, hands still tingling from the effort of holding life's aftermath, realize that in this court, there is no such thing as privacy. There are only degrees of exposure. You're polishing a goblet when it happens. Just a whisper, soft, almost playful, passed between two maids near the window. You pretend not to hear, of course, but your ears sharpen as their laughter fades. It's nothing, really. Just one of them saying, well, if the queen didn't tell him, someone else certainly has. They giggle, press hands to mouths, and scatter like startled birds when a higher-ranking lady enters. But the phrase sticks in your mind. It always does when someone says someone else, because that someone is never just a gossip. It's someone with access, and that means danger. Later that evening, after the king retires and the castle settles into his usual creaking silence, you realize what's been gnawing at you all day. It's not the maid's voice, it's what the chambermaids know. What they all know, and more than that, what they choose to pass on. Pillow talk, yes, but also the stray observations they gather like magpies. Who visits late, who lingers, who seems flustered in the morning or unusually cheerful at supper. None of this is accidental. It's espionage, delivered in aprons and lace. Tonight you're stationed just outside the king's second chamber, the one with a hidden passage behind the wardrobe. It's not officially acknowledged, this narrow hallway carved between rooms, but everyone who matters knows it's there. It leads to the private apartments, yes, but also to the less formal beds. Mistresses, favorites, the occasional guest of highly questionable status. You've seen the velvet slipper drop too quickly, the earring left behind in a chair. No one says anything, of course. It's not your place. But you remember, the king may be the center of the Tudor world, but he doesn't operate alone. His every move leaves traces, especially the ones he thinks are hidden. And there's a whole economy built around following those traces, stitching them together and offering them up to the right ears. Tonight, you see it unfold in real time. It begins with a letter, sealed in red wax, passed discreetly to a son you don't recognize. He slips into the corridor and vanishes behind the wardrobe. That's not unusual. What's unusual is the speed. Less than 10 minutes later, the king calls for wine. A different servant brings it, not one of the regulars. He walks too confidently, knows the layout too well. You note it. Noted. An hour later, you overhear a name, a short one, spoken low but not low enough. It's a woman's name, a courtier's daughter, barely 17, recently arrived and often spotted near the queen. You do your job. You keep your face neutral, but you listen. Because what happens in the king's bed doesn't stay there. It ripples outward, into appointments, inheritances, banishments. One night of intimacy can change everything. That's the true art of Tudor spycraft. Not the coded letters or poisoned rings, but the casual mention of a name in a bedroom. The softly spoken slander that gains weight in the dark. Even the bedding can tell stories. You've helped launder the sheets, and more than once you've seen them scrutinized for evidence. of intimacy, of performance, of health. One stain can start a scandal. One lack of stain, that's worse. The most dangerous thing about all this? It's not that the king might say something reckless in bed. It's that he believes he's safe there. That when his head is on a pillow and a warm body's beside him, the world can't touch him. But it can. And it does. Through you, through the other chamber servants, through the maids who change the linens and the valets who pick up discarded gloves. And what's said in bed doesn't just travel through servants. Sometimes it travels directly to foreign courts. A favored mistress can carry messages wrapped in flirtation. A dismissed lady-in-waiting might confide in the ambassador of Spain. The pillows become a pipeline. The mattress, a map of alliances. One of the quirkiest examples you've seen involved a music box, a gift from a suitor long removed from favor. It sat innocuously on a side table in the Queen's chamber for months. No one thought much of it until one day it vanished, just gone. No replacement, no comment. And then came the rumors that it had contained a secret listening device, a hollow space filled with thin tubing that might carry whispered words to the wall beyond. Is it true? Who knows? But the story alone caused 3 chambermaids to be dismissed and sparked an informal inspection of every cushion, stool, and wall tapestry in the palace. Paranoia wears velvet gloves here, but they're still gloves. Scholars argue over how deliberate all this was. Did the Tudors understand that their bedrooms were bugged in every way but electrically? Or did they genuinely believe in the sanctity of private space? One camp says they knew and used it, that the king and queen would intentionally drop phrases, lies, or fake grievances in bed just to see where the gossip led. Others believe they were naive, that they assumed bedchambers were oases of peace, not battlefields of manipulation. But you've seen enough to know better. You remember when a servant was found copying a love letter, trying to sell it to a French emissary? You remember the Queen's furious silence when she learned her bathmaid had reported her bathing habits to the Spanish envoy. You even remember a case where someone hid under the bed, a high-ranking official's page gathering evidence of a suspected affair. They caught him, of course. His punishment? Well, let's just say no one asked where he went afterward. It's late now. The king has retired. The candles have been snuffed down to low nubs. You walk the corridor in near darkness, your footfalls muffled by thick rugs. You think about the day's whispers, the night's movements, the way one small, careless phrase could set fire to the entire court if repeated at the wrong moment. As you pass a folded curtain, you pause. There's a faint voice behind it. A man's, laughing softly, and a woman, murmuring. You keep walking, fast, but not too fast. Because here, the most dangerous thing you can do is act like you know too much. The safest path. Be silent, be forgettable, but never stop listening. There's a chill in the room tonight despite the roaring fire. You stand near the bed, adjusting the covers with a care that would look ridiculous anywhere else. But not here. Not in this chamber. Not with this king. Everything must be perfect. Creased just so, embroidery facing outward, no lump in the down mattress to disturb the pageantry of repose. Because tonight the bed won't just be used, it will be seen. Not just by chambermaids or a nervous physician. By officials, nobles, witnesses, and what they're here to witness. The king's consummation. You swallow your nerves. The air smells of rosewater and warm sweat. The curtains have been drawn back, not closed, an intentional choice. Everything about this scene has been choreographed. It's the most intimate act imaginable, turned into a public ritual. If it feels absurd, that's because it is. But this is how legitimacy works in Tudor courts. It's not enough to marry. The union must be sealed, in bed, with people to confirm it happened. You try not to think about the mechanics. The sheets have been changed twice today already. The mattress fluffed, the canopy brushed, and the 4 pillows have been arranged in the very specific, very symbolic X formation, supposedly to promote good fortune and fertility. You aren't sure about the science, but you've seen noblemen fight over who gets to carry the nightshirt in a ritual procession, so you assume the pillows matter too. The room fills slowly. Not a crowd, but more than enough. Close councillors, a bishop or two, even the Lord Chamberlain, who you once saw accidentally sneeze in front of the king and spend a week in exile for it. He looks tense now, clutching a folded piece of parchment that likely contains the official language for what's about to take place. You try not to lock eyes with anyone, too awkward, and then there's a stir. The couple enters, the newlyweds. You don't look directly at them, no one does. But you can see the Queen's slippers beneath her gown, pale blue satin with embroidered vines. You can see the King's shoulder, draped in a velvet robe, lined in ermine, because nothing says romantic encounter like dead stoats. They say nothing. No declarations, no gestures. Just a slow approach to the bed, a nod to the officiants, and then stillness. There's no announcement. The chamberlain clears his throat. The bishop makes the sign of the cross. Someone murmurs a blessing about fruitfulness. And then, slowly, deliberately, the others begin to file out, except for two. Two witnesses remain, not in the bed, just near it, positioned so they can hear and see enough to verify that what needed to happen did. You're one of them. You didn't expect to be chosen. No one ever does. But this morning, your name was quietly added to the list, not because you're noble or highborn, but because you're trusted, because you've kept your mouth shut in the past, and because this is a royal marriage with massive political implications, and no one wants a rumor that the king couldn't perform. So you stand still, eyes low, ears open. The room dims. A single candle flickers near the head of the bed. You hear rustling, fabric, movement, the squeak of a bedpost, the quiet sigh. The king grunts once, maybe twice. It's all over in moments, really. You feel nothing. Not disgust, not awe, just surreal detachment. You're here, but you're not here. You could be anywhere, but instead, you're standing by a bed as the monarch of England completes a ritual that's part performance, part fertility prayer, and entirely political theatre. When it's done, the bedding is adjusted. The Queen lies still, eyes closed. The king sits up, wipes his brow, and mutters something unintelligible. The witnesses, yourself included, nod slightly. It's understood. The bishop will record it. The documents will say it was done, that the marriage is consummated, that the line of succession is no longer in jeopardy. Later you help strip the bed. The sheets are removed and checked. Yes, checked. For stains, for signs. There's a word no one says aloud, but everyone thinks. Proof. And when the maid lifts the cloth and gives the barest nod, you see shoulders relax all around the chamber. No one smiles, no one dares. But the silence feels different now, heavier but more settled. Like something enormous has been averted. Of course, not all royal consummations go so smoothly. You've heard of the awkward one between Mary Tudor and Philip of Spain, how a translator had to be present in the outer chamber because the couple barely shared a language. Or the whispered jokes about Anne of Cleves and how Henry never quite managed to complete the task. "I liked her not," he famously said, as if that was the only issue. Quirky fact. There were sometimes rehearsals, not of the act itself, thank God, but of the ceremony. Courtiers walking the routes, holding the linens, practicing where to stand so the shadows fell properly. Because when the state depends on the bedroom, the choreography matters. Historians still argue about these rituals. Some say they were largely symbolic, a holdover from medieval forms of proof, with little real need by the 16th century. Others argue they were vital political theatre, especially in cases of contested succession or foreign alliances. After all, if the marriage isn't consummated, it can be annulled. And annulments? Those stop wars. You finish changing the bed. The linens are bundled carefully, never reused. The mattress is rotated, new sheets are drawn, the pillows refluffed. You light fresh candles. The Queen will sleep here tonight. Alone, this time. The king will return to his own apartment. That's typical. The duty is done. You step back, breathe in the lavender and wax and the faintest metallic tang left behind. You say nothing to anyone, not even the other witness. There is no need. Your silence is the most valuable part of your service tonight. As you exit the chamber, you pass a group of ladies in waiting, pretending not to wait. One looks up at you, eyes curious, but doesn't speak. She doesn't need to. Everyone will know by morning. And you? You'll never look at a bed the same way again. We think changing sheets is simple until you do it under the watchful gaze of an entire court. It's mid-morning, You're in the royal bedchamber, not at night, not even after rising, but at that strange political hour when the bed becomes more than furniture. Today, it's a symbol, because the person who sleeps in it is changing, not dying, not even absent, just no longer in favor. It begins with a subtle request, innocent on the surface. Fresh linens for His Majesty's bed. That's not unusual. Beds are changed regularly, more so than most would think. But this request comes not from the regular steward, not from the chamberlain, but from one of the gentlemen of the Privy Chamber, whose rise has been so swift it makes your neck ache trying to track it. He's new, charming, and disturbingly good at folding doublets while whispering sweet nothings into the king's ear. And now he's ordering the sheets changed. You know what it means. Everyone does. Changing the bedding isn't about cleanliness. It's a signal. The person who changed it last has lost favor. The new linens don't just smell of lavender. They reek of transition. You walk the corridor with the new sheets folded neatly over your arm, conscious of every step. You pass 3 nobles and feel all of them glance at the fabric, then away, then back. They know. You feel like you're carrying a death sentence disguised as household duty. You enter the chamber and find the bed as it was last night. Slept in, yes, but undisturbed in its structure. You hesitate. You wait for the nod. It comes from the new favorite himself. A flick of the wrist. Do it. You begin the task as you've done 100 times before, pulling back the covers, smoothing the mattress, stripping the linen with practiced grace. But your hands are slower today, not from fatigue, but from understanding. The old sheets, these ones, were prepared by someone else. Someone who used to stand where you're standing. Someone now assigned to administrative duties in a quieter, less glamorous wing of the palace. The moment you lift the fitted linen corner, a hush falls over the room. 2 of the other attendants stop what they're doing. One crosses his arms, the other pretends to cough. This isn't just routine, this is a reshuffling, an announcement. You don't need to send a letter or make a speech, you just have to change the sheets. The bedding, like everything in this court, speaks a language of its own. The embroidery says who ordered it. The way it's folded says who laid it. The scent says whose servant prepared it. The thickness, the design, even the stitching patterns all signal allegiance. You're effectively updating a flag on a battlefield, removing one coat of arms and replacing it with another. The battlefield just happens to be a feather mattress. You finish smoothing the top cover and step back. The king hasn't entered yet. When he does, he won't say anything. He'll simply notice the subtle change in the feel, the smell, the crispness of the fabric. If he's pleased, he'll smile. If he's not, someone else's rise will be short-lived. This kind of shift happens quietly, but it's seismic beneath the surface. One man loses the king's ear, another gains it. You remember the last time this happened, when a favored chamber servant brought a nightcap that was too warm, and the king snapped, "Do you wish to boil me like a pudding?" That was it. The servant was gone by sundown. And the next morning, new sheets, new favorite. What's strange is how everyone accepts it. No protests, no appeals, just a quiet shuffling of duties, a redirection of glances, and the gentle acknowledgement that a new tide is rising. If you resist it, you drown. If you adapt, you survive. You've learned to observe the linen patterns like a second language. A certain flower motif means the queen's embroiderers were involved, perhaps a gift or a subtle plea for attention. Geometric borders often come from continental workshops, favored by ambitious courtiers hoping to impress with foreign taste. Sometimes the bedding itself is less about function and more about spectacle. You once helped install a green silk bedspread embroidered with tiny golden lions, commissioned for one night, never used again. That bed was meant to be seen, not slept in. There's even a strange whispered superstition about the act of changing the bedding. Some believe it affects fortune, then it wipes away bad dreams, that it resets the king's mood, that a well-made bed might incline him toward mercy. It sounds ridiculous until you realize how many pardons have been signed just hours after a bed was turned down with just the right scent of mint and rose. Coincidence? Maybe, but not one you'd test. Later in the day, you're summoned back to the chamber to check the arrangement. The king has used the bed, briefly, rested his legs after a long hunt. He made no comment about the linens, but the new favorite smiled. That's enough. The message is received. The sheets are acceptable. Which means the person who ordered them is acceptable. Which means the person who didn't isn't. There's a story that still circulates among the older servants about a nobleman whose wife was dismissed from court after she made the mistake of gifting the queen a bolt of Spanish linen that had once graced another woman's bed. A powerful woman, a former queen. The fabric, though beautiful, carried old meanings. Too old, too dangerous. The bed it touched was long gone, but the memory remained, woven into every thread. Scholars often skip over these domestic rituals in the big books about Tudor politics. They focus on treaties, battles, and parliamentary squabbles. But those of you inside the bedchambers know better. You know that shifting power can look like a general handing over a sword or a servant laying down new sheets. Tonight, you pass the folded old linens to a junior servant who takes them to be laundered or perhaps burned. If someone decides it's safer not to have them reappear, you don't ask. You don't look back. You simply move on, already calculating which flavor of perfume will go on tomorrow's pillowcases. Because in this court, loyalty is measured in thread count and revolutions begin with cotton. You've seen some strange things during your time in the palace. Half-dressed dukes wandering through the halls, nobles kissing the king's boots just a little too eagerly. But nothing prepares you for the night someone claims the Duke of Suffolk is sleepwalking through the bedchamber with the dagger in hand. At first, you think it's a joke. Another midnight tale spun by bored guards with nothing better to do. But then comes the knock, urgent, quiet, and the look on the footman's face, not even a hint of mischief, just white-lipped tension. You're summoned not because you're brave, but because you're trusted. Trusted to see and not speak. Trusted to understand that in the royal bedchamber even sleep can become political. The corridor is dim as you follow the footman, your slippers nearly silent on the woven runners. You're not alone. 2 guards flank you, eyes sharp, hands resting on the hilts of their swords. One carries a lantern. The light flickers against the tapestries as you pass, warping saints into demons, angels into gossiping nobles. The palace at night always feels like a dream you're half trying to wake from. And now the supposed sleepwalker is somewhere ahead, drifting through the king's private quarters with a weapon, and possibly no idea he's doing it. You enter the bedchamber through a side door. The king has already been moved, gently and with care, to a smaller chamber down the hall. He was reportedly annoyed, more than alarmed. Let the man sleep in the garden if he must, he said. But everyone knows this is more serious than that. It's one thing for a noble to wander during the night. It's another for him to wander into this room. The bed sits undisturbed, the sheets still warm from the king's brief nap earlier. You smooth the coverlet with nervous fingers, listening. Beyond the velvet curtains, somewhere in the gallery that connects the royal apartment to the chapel, there's movement. Slow, uncertain. You follow it. And there he is, the Duke of Suffolk. Shirt open, bare feet blackened by soot from the hearths, eyes wide but unfocused. He's not walking with intent, more like drifting, like a leaf caught in a current. The dagger is in his hand, yes, but hanging low, almost forgotten. He murmurs something under his breath. A child's rhyme, maybe. It's hard to tell. The guards hesitate. You hold up a hand. You've seen sleepwalkers before. Your cousin once fell down a flight of stairs in a daze, arms stretched out like a martyr. The trick you've learned is not to startle them, not to shout. You step forward slowly, matching the Duke's pace, until you're close enough to see the sweat glistening on his brow. He stops, turns slightly toward you. And then a voice so soft it barely makes sense, he says, "She was here, under the sheets." And then he collapses, just drops to the floor like a puppet whose strings have been snipped. You kneel beside him, checking the dagger first. It's ceremonial, ornate yes, but dull, decorative, not that it matters. In this court, a butter knife in the wrong hands at the wrong hour can spark a full-blown panic. The guards lift the Duke gently, muttering about sleep, stress, and too much wine. He's carried to his own chamber and tucked into bed like a wayward child. But the damage is done. By morning, the entire court is buzzing. They don't call it sleepwalking, of course. That would be too mundane. They call it a disturbance in the king's peace, a breach of the velvet threshold. You hear someone suggest witchcraft. Someone else mutters about secrets hidden under moonlight. But what no one says aloud is what everyone's thinking. Was it really sleepwalking? Because maybe, just maybe, the Duke wasn't confused at all. Maybe he came to the bedchamber on purpose. Maybe the sleepwalking was just a convenient story. You hear speculation over breakfast. Whispers that the Duke is unhappy with his position. That he once loved a woman now favored by the king. That he carries guilt from an old betrayal, a battlefield decision that cost a friend his life. Or perhaps more simply, he's slipping. Age, pressure, ambition. They can all twist the mind in strange ways. And in this court, no one believes in coincidence. The Privy Council convenes to discuss the event. You aren't present, obviously, but you know how these things go. Carefully worded statements, thinly veiled threats, promises of discretion. And behind it all, quiet eyes watching to see who defends the Duke too strongly, or not at all. By midweek, the incident is officially declared an accident. The Duke is forgiven, though he'll be resting at his country estate for the foreseeable future. The dagger has been misplaced. The bedchamber's locks are inspected. The king laughs about it at supper, telling a bawdy joke about ghosts in the linen. But you notice that 2 new guards have been posted outside the royal rooms. The story doesn't go away. It just changes shape. One version says the Duke was seeking absolution. Another claims he was searching for his dead wife, driven mad by grief. Still another suggests he found something, or someone, in the bed who wasn't supposed to be there. You never get the full truth. No one does. But the bed becomes a bit more tense after that. The servants make the corners tighter. The guards knock louder before entering. You take longer with the linens, because the room no longer feels sacred. It feels breached. Even scholars argue about this one. Some mention it in footnotes. The Suffolk incident, they call it, as though it were a passing storm. Others treat it as metaphor, the literal intrusion into the royal bedchamber representing the fragile boundary between intimacy and treason. A few fringe writers go full conspiracy, claiming the Duke saw something meant to be hidden. A secret lover, a foreign agent, a bastard child. Whatever it was or wasn't, you never forget that night. You never forget the way the Duke looked through you, as though the bed itself had whispered to him. And every time you smooth the king's covers now, you check beneath them. Just once, just in case. There's a particular type of courtier who never draws attention to herself, and that's exactly why she's dangerous. The ladies in waiting are meant to blend in, velvet shadows trailing behind the queen, laughing softly, pouring wine, arranging hems. But watch them closely, and you'll see the real work unfolding. It's not needlework and gossip, it's power brokerage, timing, and the weaponization of silence. And no one understands this better than you, because lately you've been observing one lady in particular, Lady Cecily, who seems to do nothing, yet somehow knows everything. She doesn't speak loudly, she never interrupts. Her gowns are elegant, never flamboyant, but she is always there, always at the Queen's elbow during prayer, beside the ambassador's wife at supper, even once, oddly, near the king's bedchamber, under the pretext of retrieving a misplaced prayer book. You've seen her slip from one room to another like perfume in a draft. She never lingers too long, never says too much. And yet, when things happen, like the sudden rise of Lord Wexley, or the Queen's last-minute change in her choice of lady dresser, Lady Cecily is somehow already in place. Tonight, you serve in the Queen's outer chamber during the informal supper. It's a small gathering, just the Queen, a few trusted ladies, and one unfortunate poet brought in for amusement. You keep to your post, arranging goblets, and ensuring the hearth is stoked. But your eyes flick toward Lady Cecily. She sits quietly, smiling faintly at the poet's clumsy verses, her hands folded neatly in her lap. But you catch the subtle flick of her gaze when the Queen mentions a diplomatic envoy arriving from the Low Countries. And later, when the Queen mentions a new appointment to the Mint, Cecily glances sideways, once, toward a younger lady whose brother happens to be in line for the role. Coincidence? Not in this court. When the Queen retires for the evening, Lady Cecily remains behind. To assist with the bedclothes, she says, but you're already on duty for that. Still, no one protests. She smooths the coverlet as if she's done it 1,000 times, then plumps the Queen's pillow with serene composure. You step aside, letting her work, pretending not to hear the quiet conversation between her and the Queen that takes place just as the door is nearly closed. Soft, short, and gone before you can gather anything more than the word hesitate. The thing about ladies in waiting is that they're often treated as part of the furniture, decorative, useful, silent. But these women share dressing rooms, beds, and daily prayers with the Queen. They see her moods, her bruises, her fear before a royal pregnancy is confirmed, and more importantly, they see who comes and goes from the Queen's apartments, who lingers too long at her side, who sends her gifts, who causes her to blink twice instead of once. Some are loyal, others are ambitious, many are both. You've seen how they exchange letters under the guise of mending sleeves, how they whisper while combing hair, how they offer a shoulder to cry on, and then pass what they learned to someone who can use it. Sometimes to help, sometimes not. Take the story of Lady Maud, who once shielded the Queen from a jealous rival by intercepting a poison-laced gift, only to later marry the rival's widowed cousin and inherit her lands. That's not coincidence. That's strategy, wrapped in lace and virtue. There's a scene burned into your memory from last summer, when the court was visiting Nonsuch Palace. The Queen was recovering from a miscarriage, and her chambers were kept dim, her visitors limited. But Lady Cecily remained. She rarely spoke. She didn't offer too many reassurances, but each morning the Queen seemed slightly calmer after she'd been there, and when the King visited, only once, Cecily stayed behind after he left. No one asked why. But that same week, the Queen's rival for influence was reassigned to serve in the Dowager Princess's household in the country. You start to realize that in this chamber, it's not the loudest voice that wins. It's the one closest to the bed. Lady Cecily knows this, and she plays the long game. She doesn't overstep, she doesn't flirt with power. She simply exists near it, until it wraps itself around her like a second gown. You once saw her reading a letter in the corridor, her expression unreadable. Later, you overheard that the Spanish ambassador had mysteriously shifted his support away from one faction. No one links it to Cecily. But you remember the seal on that letter, wax still warm when she tucked it away. Scholars often overlook these women, lumping them into the background of royal narratives. But those who study deeper know better. They know that queens didn't rule alone, and they certainly didn't survive alone. The ladies in waiting were part wardrobe, part spy network. Part emotional scaffolding. They saw, heard, remembered. They bent reality around the Queen without appearing to touch it. There's a quirky detail you recall from a tutor's notes in the archives. One lady in waiting to Queen Catherine reportedly kept a logbook of every guest who entered the Queen's chambers, who they were, how long they stayed, whether their perfume lingered afterward. She never published it, of course. But when the Queen's reputation came under fire, that same lady suddenly had enough influence to arrange 3 advantageous marriages for her nieces. She had evidence, or leverage, or maybe just memory. Tonight you walk past Lady Cecily's chamber. Her candle is still lit. You glance in, not directly, but enough to see her seated at her writing desk, a tiny silver pen gliding across parchment. She's writing something, slow and deliberate. You don't know if it's a letter, a list, or a prayer. But you do know this. Whatever she's recording, it's valuable. Maybe not now, but soon. You move on, careful not to make a sound. In this palace, footsteps echo louder than words. And somewhere behind the soft rustle of gowns and the flicker of candlelight, another quiet victory is being recorded by a woman who never raises her voice but never misses her moment. There's a fine art to folding royal pajamas, if, of course, the royal in question actually wears them. Tonight, as you smooth a silk nightshirt across the end of the king's bed, you can't help but marvel at the absurdity of it all. It's finely woven, imported from Florence, with hand-stitched embroidery around the cuffs and neckline. Gorgeous, yes, and rarely used. Because let's be honest, most Tudor monarchs sleep in less than this, some in nothing at all. And yet, here you are, carefully laying out garments that may or may not even touch the royal skin. Why? Because perception is everything. Pajamas aren't just clothing, they're a signal. The chamber is quiet. The fire hisses gently. You're alone for a moment, alone with the weight of thread and ceremony. A second set of night clothes waits in the nearby chest. Slightly heavier linen, better for colder nights. They were laid out last week during a bout of rain that had everyone complaining of chills, but the king never used them. Instead, he slept as he often does, completely bare beneath thick covers, guarded only by the heavy velvet curtain and, of course, the ever-watchful gentleman of the bedchamber. You don't speak of it, obviously. But everyone in service knows. Some kings prefer the ritual of dressing down at night, the changing into soft linens, the scented oils for the skin, the slippers set beside the bed just so. Others dismiss it as unnecessary fluff. Henry V, in his younger years, enjoyed the drama of the bedtime routine, slipping into monogrammed robes, calling for nightcaps, sometimes even inviting favored courtiers to tuck him in with conversation. But later, as his health declined, even the pretense faded. Sometimes he wouldn't undress at all, merely collapsing onto the bed with a grunt, one leg bandaged, the rest of him overheated and irritable. But on formal nights, after state banquets, diplomatic visits, or court performances, out come the nightclothes, not for comfort, for observation. Everyone expects the royal ritual to include pajamas. It reassures them. A king with proper nightwear seems more civilized, more in control. So you lay them out, fold them crisply, and pretend it all matters. You've handled every type of night garment imaginable. Silk with tiny pearl buttons, velvet trimmed with fur, utterly impractical. Fine muslin with embroidered initials, even a bizarre short robe gifted by a foreign prince that resembled a theatrical costume more than sleepwear. It was worn once, briefly, before the king called it an insult to the crown and to God, and had it quietly regifted to a distant cousin. There's a story among the older servants about a time the bedchamber received a shipment of new royal underclothes, meant for nighttime use, and one unfortunate valet misplaced the tally sheet. Panic ensued. Were all the nightshirts accounted for? What if the king asked for the missing one? What if it had the wrong embroidery? The item in question turned up under a cushion in the council chamber, apparently used to wipe spilled ink by a junior scribe. The valet was reassigned to poultry duty. You're not even sure if he's still alive. What you've come to understand is that what the king wears, or doesn't wear, to bed says as much about his reign as his decrees. During court crises, he often sleeps in full shirts and hose, ready to rise if summoned. During periods of confidence and power, he sleeps naked, as if nothing and no one could possibly reach him in the dark. It's psychology, folded and perfumed. One of the quirkier pieces you once handled was a crimson silk cap, meant to keep the head warm while sleeping. It had a small jewel sewn into the side, unnecessary, ridiculous, and oddly charming. The king wore it on cold nights, but only when alone. He said it made his head itch otherwise. You'd occasionally find it tossed under the bed in the morning, a bit of treasure half lost in the blankets. The idea of sleepwear in general is a relatively new one in this period. Commoners often sleep in whatever they wore during the day, or nothing at all. Fabric is precious, and warmth matters more than etiquette. But the court plays by different rules. Here, every moment, even unconscious ones, are part of the performance. You once overheard a visiting noble gasp when he learned the queen had her nightgowns embroidered. She dreams in script, he said, half in jest, half in awe. Which brings you to the queen's side of things. Her nightwear is a different beast entirely. Layers, always layers, even in summer. Her gowns are lighter, but never simple. There are rules about modesty, even in sleep. You help to dress her once before bedtime, smoothing the shift, buttoning the loose sleeves, tucking in the fine linen wrap that crossed her chest like a shroud. You remember thinking how sad it looked. Not romantic, not sensual, just ceremonial. Like armor made of thread. And yet, despite all the protocol, you also know of nights when the queen undresses herself, dismisses the maids, and sleeps with her hair unbound. It's not rebellion. It's exhaustion. It's humanity leaking through the seams of her station. Scholars sometimes miss the meaning behind the nightshirt. They skim past these garments in their books, focusing on wars and marriages, Never on what the king wore when he turned in, but if they looked closer, they'd see patterns. A shift in material before a major campaign, a sudden disuse of sleep robes during a period of depression, the absence of pajamas during the rise of a mistress, the reappearance of monogrammed ones after a reconciliation with the queen, and then there's the absence of clothing altogether. Because sometimes, the lack of pajamas says more than their presence. It says the king wants no barriers, that he's above custom, or that he simply cannot be bothered. You folded the nightshirt and placed it beside the bed every night this week, and every morning you found it untouched. You don't mention it, you never do. But you notice. Tonight, you complete the arrangement. Nightshirt folded, robe draped nearby, slippers aligned, everything immaculate. You dim the candles, you fluff the pillows, you step back, hands clasped, and once again you wonder, will he wear them tonight? Or will the royal skin meet the royal sheets with nothing in between, as if to remind everyone, courtiers, rivals, servants like you, that even naked the king remains untouchable? It's the morning after a royal wedding, and you're holding a velvet box worth more than your entire family's estate. Inside is a jewel, a thick gold chain with an emerald pendant the size of a walnut glittering like it holds secrets. This is the morning gift, and your job is to deliver it to the queen, who, in theory, has just completed the most important task of her life, sleeping with the king. The court's already buzzing, of course. It always is the day after a royal wedding night. Servants bustle with feigned purpose, trying to look busy while whispering in corners. Nobles pass each other knowing glances. Everyone wants confirmation that the marriage has been consummated. Not because they're nosy, though they absolutely are, but because legitimacy hangs in the balance. If the king and queen didn't complete the deed last night, the whole alliance could unravel. That's where you and the jewel come in. You make your way toward the queen's apartment, careful not to scuff your boots or jostle the box. There's a formality to this, a ritual that must be done exactly right. The morning gift isn't just a wedding present, it's a declaration. A royal way of saying, yes, we did it. It happened. She is now mine, in body and name. Romantic, not particularly, but strategic. Absolutely. The origin of the morning gift goes back centuries, a customary payment or token given by the husband to his wife after the marriage was made whole. Among common folk, it might be a plot of land or a new cow. Among royals, it's usually gemstones and estates, sometimes entire castles. One queen, years ago, received a manor with its own deer park after her wedding night. She never lived there, but it remained hers until her death. You pass into the queen's antechamber, nodding to the guards who open the door with ceremonial slowness. Inside, the queen sits at her dressing table, looking as composed as ever. If you didn't know better, you'd think she'd just returned from an afternoon nap, not a life-altering night beneath royal sheets. Her hair is freshly brushed, pinned with modest pearls. Her nightgown has been replaced with a loose robe of cream-colored silk, modest but regal. She's surrounded by two ladies-in-waiting and a silent physician, who stands in the corner pretending not to eavesdrop. You kneel, present the box, and step back. The queen opens it, lifts the emerald, and gives the slightest nod. A smile flickers, not joy exactly, but satisfaction. She knows what this gift means. She knows it will be shown to others, passed through court like a whispered secret. Yes, the emerald will say. She is now fully queen. But here's the part no one talks about. Sometimes the morning gift is given whether the deed was done or not. Sometimes the king is too tired, or too drunk, or simply unwilling. But a gift must still be given. Appearances must be kept. And so the jewel appears bright and clean, covering a night of silence or awkward disinterest. Because if people believe it happened, it might as well have. You've seen it before. Another wedding, another morning gift. A ruby bracelet given with fanfare and a smile. Everyone assumed the night had been successful, but behind the scenes whispers flew. The queen never got pregnant. The king never visited her chambers again. Some said he never touched her at all, but the bracelet remained. History recorded the gift, not the silence. There's also the more uncomfortable tradition, when the bedding is inspected, literally. Servants like you tasked with discreetly checking the linens for stains. Proof of consummation, they say. As if blood and sweat can confirm a legal contract. You did it once. The Queen's chambermaid folded back the sheets for you. There was a mark, yes. Was it enough? You don't know, but it was shown to the steward, and that was the end of the discussion. Bit of thread, a drop of something red, and suddenly the kingdom could breathe again. Some scholars insist that the morning gift was a quaint tradition, little more than decorative. But those who've stood in this room know better. Exchange carries legal weight. In many contracts, a queen couldn't claim certain lands or titles until the gift was received. It confirmed her status as wife, not just bride. And in the brutal chessboard of royal inheritance, the difference between those two words could mean life or exile. Lady Cecily, always observing from the background, approaches now to help fasten the necklace around the Queen's neck. Her fingers move quickly, but she gives you a glance. Just one. You hold it a second longer than you should. That's the real conversation. Did it happen? Do you believe it? You blink once, neither yes nor no, and look away. You'll let the emerald speak for itself. Later, you pass through the king's apartments, where the atmosphere is entirely different. Laughter, meat bones scattered from breakfast. The king leans back in his chair, flushed with wine and victory. The new song has already been composed. The court musician is rehearsing it nearby. Something about honor in the sheets and God's blessing by candlelight. It's terrible poetry, but it doesn't matter. The message is clear. The king did his duty. You help straighten the sheets. Yes, those sheets. They've already been turned over, but you recognize the pillow indentations. There's no blood, no clear sign of anything. But that doesn't stop the next valet from bringing in a new set of linens. He wants nothing to do with the last man's bedding. This is the other half of the ritual. Clean the bed, erase the act, reset the scene. Royal beds are like altars, worshipped at night, wiped clean by morning. There's a rumor that some queens, in desperation, would fake the signs of consummation, smearing wine or pricking a finger, slipping something onto the sheets to imply a stain that never came naturally. It sounds like a scandal, but you can't blame them. When your entire worth is pinned to a single night, wouldn't you take your fate into your own hands? As the day unfolds, the emerald shines. It is mentioned in court. It is admired. The queen wears it without comment, but everyone sees it. And everyone understands what it means. It means the marriage has begun. It means the queen is real now. And it means that, for at least one morning, the bed did what it was supposed to do. If you've been picturing the Tudor royal household as a place of flowing silk, embroidered pillows and candlelit glances, pause right here. Because tonight, you're going to meet the people who designed that illusion, who decided which pillows matched which tapestries, which servants stood where, and how the king should enter and exit his own bed. You're not just learning about royal routine now, you're seeing the scriptwriters behind the scenes, the secret architects of bedchamber protocol. These aren't the monarchs, or even the chamber grooms, but a quieter, more formidable class. The master of ceremonies, the Lord Chamberlain, the mistress of the robes, and a rotating circle of court etiquette advisors who obsess over everything from curtain colors to handkerchief folds. These people don't wear crowns, but they choreograph everything the crowned heads do, especially when it comes to the bed. You first encounter one during a dispute over the layout of the Queen's confinement chamber. Should the bed be centered or slightly off to allow more room for midwives? Should the blessed relics be placed above the headboard or to the left side facing Mecca? Not for religious reasons, but because leftward relics encourage softer labor. You thought they were joking. They weren't. The mistress of the robes gave you a look sharp enough to pierce chainmail. These protocol designers do more than arrange furniture. They shape narrative. The monarchy is a living myth, and the bedchamber is its most sacred stage. A king's rising, the queen's preparation for sleep, even the acts of closing the bed curtains. None of it happens without guidelines. And if those guidelines are ignored, there are consequences. For instance, there's a case from a decade ago when a foreign duchess dared to assist the queen into bed without clearance. The whole family lost their English titles by the end of the week. One of the most detailed manuals in circulation is simply called The Ordinances of the Bedchamber. It's handwritten, of course, and locked in a chest most of the time. You've seen it. leather-bound, delicate, stuffed with parchment inserts and updated constantly. Inside are rules like, the king's nightshirt must be warmed 5 minutes before use, not 6. The order of bed linen application, undersheet, bolster, upper sheet, quilt, coverlet, no deviation. The queen must be accompanied by 3 ladies when retiring, one of whom must touch her elbow. The bedding must always face east, even when traveling. Yes, even when traveling. This explains the fiasco at Dover last year, when a portable bed was mistakenly placed north-south for a seaside visit. The Lord Chamberlain nearly had a full collapse. "We do not sleep toward Calais," he bellowed, which was an odd way of phrasing things, but you got the idea. That night, 3 servants were demoted, 2 fined, and the bed was physically rotated at midnight under torchlight. Also, the king could wake with his feet pointed away from France. It's easy to laugh at these rules until you realize how effective they are. They create order, hierarchy, predictability in a court where favor rises and falls faster than the tides. The rules say who's important, who isn't, who folds the nightshirt and who just watches, who lights the candles and who stands back as the king steps into bed. A misstep isn't just an error, it's a political insult, and some people game the system. You've seen it happen. A valet delays drawing curtains just long enough to have a private word with the king. A lady-in-waiting accidentally lingers during the queen's undressing, offering a few comforting words about her rival. These breaks in protocol are subtle, but powerful. They can shift the mood, influence decisions. They're not supposed to happen, but the architects of etiquette know they will, and they build in allowances, unspoken loopholes for the savvy. You once overheard 2 chamber planners arguing for an hour about the order in which servants should enter the king's chamber at sunrise. The central point of contention? Whether the groom of the stall should enter before or after the page with the basin. "He who knows the bowels must not see the face first," one exclaimed. You're not sure what that means, but it was said with conviction. The same applies to bedding changes. There's a prescribed schedule, but also exceptions, coded phrases like linen for renewal, which actually means someone's lost favor and their hand-stitched sheets are being replaced with the plainer set used for guests. Bedding isn't just bedding, it's a bulletin board for the court's internal politics. Who has velvet edging? Who gets lavender sachets? Who suddenly receives the same coarse linen used by visiting clergymen? The scholars debate whether these architects held real power or merely decorative influence. Some insist they were glorified wedding planners with fancier titles, but if you've worked under them, you know better. The mistress of the robes can decide who gets access to the queen's bedside. The Lord Chamberlain can whisper a name into the king's ear just as he's lying down to sleep. These are not idle gestures. These are tactical positions. A quirk you've come to admire is how these etiquette architects keep records of everything. Not just logs of visitors or bed linens, but impressions. How the queen looked after supper, whether the king seemed irritated by the angle of his pillow, even the temperature of the bedchamber on significant nights. You found one such note once tucked behind a portrait. His Majesty tossed at length, bed possibly too warm. Remove one blanket on nights following wine. Even in sleep the monarchy's managed. Tonight you follow the routine to the letter. The king's room is arranged. His nightshirt is folded exactly as described. The coverlet is turned down with one diagonal crease. You light the candles in reverse order. Another rule. You've learned not to question it. And just before the king arrives, the Lord Chamberlain himself enters to inspect the setup. He says nothing, but runs one finger along the edge of the pillow, then nods. That's your approval. He doesn't thank you. He leaves. But you don't mind. In this court, silence means success. And as you step back, blending into the shadows, you realize someone designed this moment. Every part of it, including where you're standing. And that someone probably sleeps better than the king. The palace is oddly quiet this morning. Not serene, tense. The kind of silence that settles just before something terrible happens. Like the moment when a tapestry shifts in a breeze and everyone holds their breath, expecting it to fall. You felt this before, usually before an execution or a war declaration. But today it's something else. You feel it in the footsteps of the courtiers, too fast, too sharp. You see it in the furrowed brows of the scribes and the unusually pale face of the groom of the robes. Something is coming. And as you pass the king's bedchamber and glance toward the shadowed corner where Thomas Cromwell used to stand, always early, always composed, you realize it's already here. Cromwell is gone. No announcement, no formal dismissal, just a noticeable absence. The man who, until yesterday, could have recited every name and title in the court with terrifying speed, is now nowhere to be found. And the bedchamber is already shifting to reflect his absence. You first notice it in the linens. The sheets on the king's bed are different this morning. Subtle, but not to you. The trim is changed. The monogram, a small embroidered R flanked by Tudor roses, is no longer stitched into the hem. Cromwell had those made. He'd insisted on the extra emblems, calling it an elegant reminder of majesty. The king had rolled his eyes at the time, but hadn't refused them. Now they're gone, removed overnight, replaced with simpler linen, plainer, neutral. You ask no questions. But inside, you understand. When a man falls from favor in the Tudor court, his influence is scrubbed away like spilled wine. Quickly, silently, with a determination bordering on panic. Cromwell's fall is both sudden and not. You saw it coming, as many did, in the small signs. The king snapping at him during a council meeting. The cold look from Lady Mary when Cromwell offered her a perfumed handkerchief. The wedding. Oh, that wedding. The one Cromwell arranged between the king and Anne of Cleves, which turned out to be a disaster wrapped in imported brocade. The moment the king saw her and whispered that she looked like a Flanders mare, the tension in the room had become unbearable. Cromwell tried to salvage it, of course, with diplomacy and flattery, and an endless supply of carefully scented bedding. But no amount of lavender could disguise political humiliation. It's said the king never forgave him, that Anne's face haunted him even in sleep. And who had arranged the whole debacle? The same man who once had the privilege of entering the royal chamber at dawn, who chose the bed hangings, who suggested the new Turkish carpets. The same man who dared to think he was untouchable. The day before his arrest, Cromwell still stood at the foot of the king's bed as usual, hands clasped behind his back, a smirk in his eyes. He spoke of treasury reforms and foreign envoys. You remember the king listening, nodding once and then turning away without comment. The silence that followed was cold enough to make the fire crackle louder. You didn't know then that it would be the last time Cromwell was allowed inside the chamber. Now, the door is guarded. New servants wait inside. One of the king's lesser favorites, a dull but extremely polite man, is already being dressed in Cromwell's old spot. He folds the king's cloak with visible nervousness, hands trembling slightly. You wonder how long he will last. This morning you helped change the bed again. Another set of linens, another signal. This time the fabric is slightly rougher. The king seems to prefer it that way when he's in a bad mood. No fuss, he grunted earlier. No more damned ornament. You take it as a warning. The curious thing about Cromwell, he never held military rank. Yet no general in the field was as efficient with logistics. He knew when the king would rise, when he would eat, and what kind of bedsheet suited a hangover. He once had the mattresses in the hunting lodge replaced in advance of the king's arrival, simply because he overheard a complaint about the old ones during a card game. But now his memory is a stain everyone's scrubbing. His name isn't spoken in the chamber today, not even once. That's how you really know he's finished. No sarcasm, no curses, just nothing. In the Tudor court, being forgotten is worse than being despised. The gossip flows, of course, outside the chamber, in the kitchens, in the stables. One servant claims Cromwell was caught plotting with the French. Another insists he was planning to seize the royal seal. A more colourful version suggests he replaced the king's personal bed-warming pan with one that spelled curses in ash. All nonsense, probably. But the more absurd the rumour, the more power it gains. What's true is this: the king has turned. And when he turns, everything in his orbit is rearranged to reflect that new gravitational pull. Servants change, furniture moves, the bedding shifts, and the one-time architect of order becomes a ghost whose only remains are smoothed-out pillows and a few unsigned letters. One of the more unsettling parts: Cromwell's bedroom was emptied within hours of his arrest. You saw it, the tapestries stripped, the mattress rolled up and carted out by two scullions who barely made eye contact. His bedding, a luxurious set of sheets made from Italian damask, was quietly sent to the royal laundry and has yet to be returned. Probably never will, There's a quirk in all this that you can't ignore. Cromwell once told you, casually over a goblet of spiced wine, that the king sleeps best when the moon is new. Less light to disturb the dreams, he said. He had the windows in the king's chamber covered with extra thick tapestries on those nights. You wonder if that's still being done. You doubt it. The scholars write about Cromwell's fall in terms of politics, his religious reforms, his enemies, his ambition. But you, who folded sheets under his command, who watched the king grimace at a pillow too stuffed, know there's more to it. The bedchamber never lies. When a man falls out of favor, the linens change before the warrant is signed. Today, as you close the door on the king's room, the chamber feels heavier, not with grief, not even fear. Just the oppressive weight of what's missing. No perfume, no pageantry, no Cromwell, just a man in a freshly made bed, dreaming of power and already looking for someone else to fold his nightshirt. You're up before dawn today, summoned early by the still bleary-eyed under-steward, who mumbles something about polishing hinges. Not a task for your rank, but then he mutters her in the same sentence. And everything makes sense. Her doesn't need a name. Everyone in the bedchamber circle knows who's meant. She's the one with the powdered throat, the fox fur wrap, and the slippers that never make a sound on stone floors. She's the one who never passes through the queen's apartments, but is somehow always nearby. She's the king's mistress, the unofficial one, the real one, and she has a door no one acknowledges. So here you are, before breakfast, crouched in a narrow corridor behind the king's chamber, rubbing beeswax into the lock of a doorway that officially doesn't exist. The entrance is so discreet it might as well be part of the paneling. It leads not into the king's room directly, but into a sort of alcove between rooms, a private space, almost womb-like, lit only by a small glass-paned window too high for anyone to peek through. From there, a second door leads into the royal apartments, not marked, not guarded. If you've ever wondered how mistresses came and went without being seen, this is how. And now you know what you're maintaining. The hinges squeak faintly as you open the panel and you wince. The king hates unnecessary noise at night. The mistress, Lady Rosamond, though that isn't her real name, hates being made to wait. This passageway is her lifeline, her power line, her insurance. She enters when summoned, exits before the dawn trumpet. She always smells of cinnamon and violets, and never wears the same robe twice. You've seen her slip through here with her face half covered, once even cloaked as a scullery maid. No one stopped her. Sometimes you pass her in the corridor and she nods, eyes half-lidded as though you're just another fixture. But once she brushed your sleeve by accident, and you noticed her fingers were ice cold. That detail stuck with you. Her hands were freezing, even though she spent her nights in the king's bed. What does that mean? The bedding in the king's room changes more often now. Richer linens, lighter blankets, patterns subtly different, not chosen by the queen. These choices are for someone else. You notice tiny alterations. The pillows arranged to one side of the bed instead of centered. The way the curtain is pulled back a little further to let in just a sliver of moonlight. These are not court-standard habits. These are the habits of a woman shaping her space in silence. You've seen it before. Last week. The nightshirt the king usually ignores was found folded, neatly placed on a side table, not by a servant, but by her. You recognized the lavender sprigs tucked inside, her signature scent. The king didn't comment, but he wore it that night. And then there are the conversations. Quiet, occasional, but unmistakably personal. You've overheard the king's voice drifting through the walls, lower than usual, as if speaking to someone at his shoulder, not across a hall, not orders, not proclamations, just musings, grievances, confessions. That's what makes mistresses so dangerous. They don't rule, they don't sign, but they listen. At night, in bed, when the armor of state has been taken off and the man underneath is raw and exposed. It's said that Lady Rosamond once convinced the king not to execute a minor noble simply by comparing him to her cousin. Too foolish to be treasonous, she reportedly whispered. The king laughed and tore up the order, the noble, none the wiser, now owes his life to a woman with no title and a stolen door key. There's a debate among historians about these women. Were they manipulators or victims? Agents of influence or prisoners of whim? The records are maddeningly vague. The Queen's ladies rarely mention them by name. Council documents ignore them entirely, and yet entire careers have ended or been born because of their whispers. One of the oddest facts you've learned. Some of these private doors were designed into the palace layout from the beginning, not as afterthoughts, as features. Architects and carpenters were given instructions that included secondary entries for privacy, deliberately vague language, but everyone knew what they were for. You pull the panel shut gently now, watching how perfectly it blends back into the wall, invisible again. The wax you've applied leaves a subtle sheen, quiet, efficient. She'll use it tonight, probably. Maybe she already has. The sheets will be changed again tomorrow. The scent of cinnamon will cling faintly to the pillows, and no one will speak of it. But everyone will know. You once caught a young maid scrubbing those same sheets with more aggression than necessary. When you asked why, she muttered, "Because I'm not allowed to be angry." That was all she said. But it told you everything. Anger in this world must be laundered like sweat, thoroughly, discreetly, and with no trace left behind. Not long ago, another mistress fell out of favor. No one knows why. She simply stopped being summoned. Her robes disappeared. The hidden door she used was sealed. Within days, she was married off to a distant cousin and sent to the Welsh borderlands. She's likely tending sheep now. That's how fast the bed can turn on you. And yet, the secret doors remain. The corridors are still swept. The linen's still changed. As long as there is power to be gained in whispered promises and midnight comfort, there will be hidden passageways, oiled hinges, and velvet slippers gliding across stone unnoticed. Tonight, as the torches flicker low and the palace exhales the last of its day's breath, you hear the click. That door, her door, has opened. You do not look. You do not speak. You simply fold the nightshirt, and you remember which side of the bed the king will sleep on tonight. The first time you hear the scratching in the bed curtains, you think it's a mouse. A harmless little palace rodent come to nibble on crumbs dropped from the king's midnight sugared almonds. But when you draw the curtain back and see the reddish-brown specks on the linen, you know better. Bedbugs. Not the tiny, ignorable kind either. These are big enough to make a grown man flinch, and they found their way into the one place you least want to find them, the royal bed. It would be bad enough if this were just about the sheets, but this is the Tudor court. The pests are never just pests. The moment a bug bites the wrong person, especially if that person is the king, it becomes a matter of politics. Comfort equals mood, and mood equals policy. And if His Majesty wakes with an itchy welt on his calf, Parliament might suddenly be in for a very bad week. You've seen it happen before. Last winter, a flea bite behind the king's ear coincided with a French envoy's visit. The king was irritable, scratching through the reception, and the envoy left without securing the trade agreement he'd been pushing for months. The following week, the court was whispering that France had failed to please the English crown, all over a flea. Bedbugs, though, are trickier. They don't just appear, they arrive. On the hems of gowns, in the folds of blankets tucked into travel chests, which means someone brought them here. That fact alone is enough to turn an itchy nuisance into a diplomatic weapon. Was it the visiting Spanish contingent, the Queen's linen supplier, or perhaps one of the king's own chamber staff with a grudge? You report the discovery quietly, but not quietly enough to avoid drawing a raised eyebrow from the groom of the stool. Within minutes, the bed is stripped, the sheets bundled like contraband, and the mattress hauled outside for inspection. 2 junior servants run for vinegar and herbs, muttering charms under their breath, half genuine belief, half theatrical reassurance. You can feel the tension buzzing through the room like static. This isn't just about cleanliness. This is about control of the king's body. The king, fortunately, is still at chapel, unaware of the intrusion. But that buys you only so much time. When he returns, you'll notice the missing bedspread, the fresh-smelling sheets, the faint tang of vinegar in the air. If you tell him the truth, he might laugh, or he might demand an investigation. If you lie, you risk someone else telling him first. Meanwhile, the gossip has already begun to crawl faster than the bugs themselves. In the outer chamber, you hear a lady-in-waiting whisper to another that the Queen's new tapestries came from a merchant known for less than pure storerooms. In the gallery, a page suggests that the infestation might be the result of the king's less public visitors. Even in the kitchens, someone mutters that a bedbug bite is God's little reminder not to be too comfortable. This is where you come in, not as a cleaner, but as a quiet negotiator. You must decide what story leaves this room. If the bugs came from the Spanish, relations could sour overnight. If they're blamed on the French, trade talks stall. If they're attributed to a careless servant, someone's career, and possibly their life, is over. The older chamber servants tell you of a time years ago when a cluster of bites on the king's ankle was traced back to a gifted set of blankets from Scotland. The incident was exaggerated into an attempted poisoning by pest. By the end of the month, the Scottish ambassador had been recalled, and the blankets burned in a very public display in the palace courtyard. No one remembers whether the bugs were truly from Scotland, but everyone remembers the fallout. There's a quirky superstition among the laundresses that if you crush a bedbug between two coins and slip it into the bed frame, the rest will flee. You've seen it done once. An old penny, its edges stained faintly brown, tucked under the king's headboard. Did it work? Perhaps. Or perhaps the bugs simply followed the warmth of another host. Either way, the coin was left there for months, a silent talisman hidden inches from royal dreams. The scholars debate whether such small irritants genuinely influenced Tudor politics, or whether these stories are just the palace's way of turning the mundane into the mythical. But anyone who's lived within these walls knows better. The king's comfort is the kingdom's stability. If the sheets are smooth and the nights are restful, tempers cool. If not, well, rebellions have begun over less. By mid-afternoon, the bed is reset, fresh linens inspected twice. The mattress turned and sprinkled with dried lavender. The bed curtains brushed and refitted. You smooth the coverlet one last time, eyeing the seams for movement. Nothing. For now. You know they'll be back eventually, they always are, but you've bought the court some peace. When the king returns, he runs a hand over the fresh bedding without comment. That's your reward. Silence. The only sound in the room is the faint hiss of the fire and the rustle of the bed curtains as you step back. Later, as you leave the chamber, you pass two gentlemen deep in conversation. One says, "Did you hear? The Spanish brought vermin into the palace." The other shakes his head. "Nonsense. It was a maid from Calais." You keep walking, eyes ahead. You don't confirm or deny. You've done your part, because in this palace even the smallest bite can leave a scar on the realm. You've been told to stand ready in the Privy Chamber this afternoon, but not for bedding changes or candlelighting. No, today is something different, something rare. A foreign ambassador has requested a tour of the royal apartments, including the bedchamber itself. Not the public staterooms, not the chapel, not the gardens, the bedroom. You can feel the ripple of unease this has caused in the household. Showing an outsider where the king sleeps is like showing them where the crown jewels are kept. Except in this case, the treasure isn't gold. It's the image of intimacy and power, carefully staged for foreign eyes. The ambassador is Venetian, a man with sharp cheekbones and an even sharper reputation for writing scandalous letters back to his republic. He has already toured the kitchens, the stables, the armory, praising everything with exaggerated gestures, though you suspect his true observations are locked behind that sly smile. Now he's here, standing in the doorway of the Privy Chamber, bowing just deeply enough to show respect without conceding superiority. His translator murmurs introductions. You keep your eyes down but your ears open. The Lord Chamberlain leads the group into the outer rooms first. They comment on the tapestries, the warm scent of beeswax polish, the silver warming pans lined up neatly along the wall. This is all polite foreplay, you realize. The real moment is yet to come, when the curtains part and the bed is revealed. When it finally happens, there's a small pause, not for lack of grandeur, but because grandeur here is different. The Venetian court, you've heard, prefers open displays, beds draped in gold, pearl-studded pillows, carved headboards inlaid with jewels. The king's bed is magnificent, yes, but in a restrained English way. Dark oak posts rise like columns, supporting a canopy thick with crimson velvet. The embroidery is dense and symbolic. Roses, lilies, the intertwined initials of the king and queen, whichever queen currently holds the position. The mattress is wide, the linens snowy white, the pillows arranged with mathematical precision. The ambassador takes a slow step forward. His eyes sweep the bed like a man appraising a piece of art, or perhaps a piece of territory. He asks a question in Italian. The translator hesitates before repeating it in English. Does His Majesty sleep here alone? It's a loaded question, one that floats in the air like incense. The Lord Chamberlain smiles faintly, the kind of smile that says nothing and everything. His Majesty sleeps where he wishes, he replies. This is his bed. That answer seems to satisfy, or at least amuse, the ambassador. He leans slightly closer, as though inspecting the weave of the coverlet. You wonder what he's really looking for. Signs of use, indentations, a faint scent of perfume not belonging to the Queen. You've seen people try to read a bed the way others read tea leaves. What follows is a slow, deliberate performance. The Chamberlain explains the daily lever ritual, how the king is dressed here in the morning, how the gentlemen of the bedchamber attend him, how privacy is both respected and entirely absent. The ambassador listens, nodding, occasionally glancing at the pillows as if imagining who might have sat there during whispered conversations. One of the more theatrical touches comes when a servant demonstrates the closing of the curtains. They fall in a heavy, almost soundless sweep, the embroidered folds meeting in the center, like the ceiling of a vault. The Venetian murmurs approval. Privacy, after all, is a form of luxury. There's an odd quirk to these tours. They're both an invitation and a warning. By showing the bed, the monarchy is saying, look how close you are allowed to come. But it's also saying, this closeness is staged. You see what we allow you to see. No ambassador truly believes they've been given an unfiltered view. They just hope to glean enough to write something useful or scandalous back home. You've seen records of other such tours. A French envoy once remarked that the English king's bed was as fit for war as for sleep, a reference to its fortress-like posts and the weapons discreetly stored within reach. A Spanish ambassador claimed the bed was too wide for fidelity, which caused a minor stir in court gossip. Even the Germans, practical as ever, commented on the thickness of the mattress, noting it was well suited for cold northern nights and other labors. As the Venetian is led out, he casts one last look over his shoulder. It's quick but telling. He's memorizing it. Not the bed itself, but the space around it. The placement of chairs, the size of the hearth, the distance to the nearest door. He'll write it all down later, along with his impressions of the fabrics and the smell of the air. And somewhere in his coded report, there will be a line about what the bed suggests about the king's appetites, his habits, and perhaps his vulnerabilities. Once they're gone, you help straighten the room again. Not much needs changing. The visit was brief, nothing touched. But still, the sheets are smoothed, the pillows adjusted, the curtains retied. It's habit. You erase the trace of strangers. As you leave, you think about how odd it is that a bed, a simple piece of furniture, can serve as both a diplomatic gesture and a fortress of secrets. To the Venetian, it was a curiosity, a status symbol, maybe even a clue. To you, it's just Tuesday, and tomorrow, someone else will come to see it. Someone else will try to read the truth in the fold of velvet, but the truth, as always, will stay between the sheets. It's not every day you're summoned to the Queen's bedchamber with the warning. Do not look at her face unless she speaks to you. You know immediately what it means. There's been an illness. Not a fainting spell or one of the seasonal coughs that sweep through the palace each winter, but something serious enough to pull in the physicians, the herbalists, and even the quiet, sharp-eyed apothecary from the London shops who usually treats the king's horses. When the Queen's body fails her, the kingdom feels it. And when the illness confines her to bed, the bed itself becomes a kind of medical stage. The chamber is dim when you enter. All the shutters are closed, the air thick with the smells of vinegar, rosemary, and something more bitter. Rue, perhaps. Heavy hangings around the bed create narrow inner room, and you pass through them like entering a tent in a battlefield camp. The Queen lies propped against a mound of pillows, her skin pale and waxy, her lips cracked. She's not wearing the stiff outer gown that normally keeps her posture regal. Instead, she's in a soft shift, the neckline loosened for easier breathing. A warm compress rests against her chest, steaming faintly. You're here to change the linens. Not a small task under normal conditions, but with the Queen ill, it's a logistical nightmare. Everything must be done without jostling her, without exposing her too much to the cooler air, without letting the smell of her sickness escape into the rest of the palace. Her ladies flank you, one on each side, their eyes following every movement you make. You're hyper-aware of the silence. The only sounds are the occasional cough, the clink of a glass vial on the bedside table, and the soft rustle of cloth. There's more to this than comfort. In Tudor courts, the health of the Queen, especially if she's of childbearing age, has direct political consequences. Illness could delay an heir. A lingering sickness could invite whispers about her suitability as a wife. You've heard what happens when those whispers reach the wrong ears: annulments, banishments, or worse. And so, every pillowcase you change, every blanket you tuck in, becomes part of a larger campaign to keep her image intact. The bedding itself is treated as medicine. The sheets have been washed in boiled water infused with marjoram and sage, meant to chase away bad humors. The mattress has been turned so she now rests on the cool side, a practice that the older ladies swear will lower a fever. A new coverlet, lighter and thinner, is brought in to keep her from overheating. Even the color matters. Pale green this time, believed to soothe the mind and encourage recovery. You work carefully, sliding the fresh linen beneath her with the help of two ladies. They move her gently, one hand at her shoulder, the other supporting her back. She barely stirs. Her eyes remain closed, though once, when you smooth the sheet under her arm, she murmurs something. You can't make out the words, but one of her ladies answers softly, "Soon, Your Grace. Rest." There's a constant undercurrent of caution here. Illness is private, but in the royal court, privacy is impossible. Every change in her appearance will be noted. Every decision about her care will be discussed. Already you've heard the corridor gossip. The Spanish ambassador asking whether the Queen is delicate by nature. A certain duchess remarking that she's looked pale for weeks. These comments are small now, but they can grow teeth. A curious ritual plays out as the linens are finished. One of the ladies brings a sprig of rosemary and lays it on the pillow beside the Queen's head. Another tucks a folded scrap of parchment under the mattress. A written prayer to St. Roch, patron saint of plague victims. Whether these charms have any effect is irrelevant. They look protective, and that's half the point. The physicians debate quietly in the corner whether her illness is an imbalance of the humors or the result of cold vapors from the stone floors. You keep your head down, and you know enough to catch the underlying tension. They don't really know. They're hoping time, rest, and a clean bed will do what their leeches and tonics cannot. It's worth remembering that beds in Tudor times were not just for sleeping. They were where people gave birth, recovered from injuries, received visitors, and all too often died. The bed is a throne in miniature, a place where rulership and vulnerability meet. Seeing the Queen in hers, stripped of jewels and courtly stiffness, is a reminder that the body beneath the crown is mortal. You finish tucking the coverlet, step back, and bow your head slightly before retreating through the bed curtains. Outside, the air feels cooler, clearer, less oppressive. But even here, the unease lingers. Everyone passing through the Privy Chamber glances toward the bed as though they might catch sight of her, or catch what she has. By the next morning, the bedding will be changed again. If she improves, the sheets will be scented with rose water, the curtains drawn back to let in light. If she worsens, the colors will darken, the room kept in shadow. You've seen both outcomes before in other chambers for other queens. For now, the linens are fresh, the pillows fluffed, the green coverlet smoothed perfectly over her small, still form, and you leave knowing that the fate of a nation can rest on whether a woman recovers beneath the weight of that coverlet or doesn't. It's a damp, windy night, and you've been ordered to remain in the king's bedchamber long after your usual duties are finished. No explanation given. Only that His Majesty may require service at once. That usually means an extra blanket, a fresh nightcap, or perhaps the closing of a stubborn window shutter. But tonight the air in the chamber feels taut, expectant. The fire pops sharply in the grate, and the king's boots remain by the hearth, polished, perfectly aligned, but never removed to be stored away. You hear it before you see it, a metallic clink of a sword hilt striking something hard, followed by the muted thud of boots against the corridor's woven carpet. The door opens without ceremony. Two guards enter first, then a third figure, broad-shouldered, masked, and carrying a small chest under one arm. He moves like a soldier, but not one you recognize. The guards remain at the door. The masked man steps forward. The king, still dressed in a loose shirt and hose, is sitting on the edge of the bed, his hands clasped, watching with a look you've seen only twice before. Once when a French spy was brought in for questioning, and once when his own groom confessed to stealing from the privy purse. This is not a social call. The chest is set on the table beside the bed. The masked man opens it with slow precision, revealing bundles of parchment tied in ribbon, a dagger with an ivory hilt, and what looks like a folded piece of fine linen. White, embroidered with a crest you don't immediately recognize. The king's eyes flick to the linen first. His fingers twitch, but he doesn't touch it. You realize what you're witnessing. The delivery of confiscated items from someone who has fallen from grace. And not just anyone. Someone who'd been inside this very bedchamber. The dagger might have been decorative once, perhaps gifted during a festival or hunt. The papers could be letters, but letters here are never harmless. And that linen? It's bedding. A pillowcase maybe, from a set made only for the king's personal use. Whoever this person was, they had both the trust and the proximity to leave such a thing behind. The king nods once. The masked man replaces the items, closes the chest, and leaves without a word. The guards follow, shutting the door with deliberate softness. For a moment, the king says nothing. He stares at the bed as if weighing whether it still belongs to him. Then, quietly, he instructs you to change everything. The sheets, the pillows, even the mattress if necessary. His tone is calm, but you understand. It's not about cleanliness, it's about erasure. You set to work, stripping the bed while he paces. The mattress is turned, the frame wiped with vinegar, the pillows replaced with ones from the adjoining storeroom. You avoid looking directly at him, but you notice how his hands clench when you remove the bolster. There's an unspoken rule in the royal household. When someone is removed from favor, especially someone with bedchamber access, their presence must be scrubbed away instantly. No thread, no scent, no trace can remain. The new bedding is plain, almost austere, as though comfort itself is temporarily unwelcome. While you work, you think about the stories older servants have told, about nights when favorites were dismissed without warning. Their clothes left hanging in the chamber for hours before someone was ordered to burn them. One groom claimed he once found a diamond ring wedged in the bed frame after such a dismissal. He turned it in, of course, but a month later he was reassigned to the stables. Too much knowledge can be as dangerous as outright betrayal. The king finally sits again when you're halfway through remaking the bed. Strange, he says to no one in particular. You think you know who is loyal. His voice is flat. You don't answer. You keep folding, tucking, smoothing. There's a small, almost absurd detail about nights like this. The new sheets are always scented with rosemary instead of lavender. No one will say why, but the change is consistent. Some say rosemary is for remembrance, others that it clears the air of malice. Either way, tonight the bed smells sharper, greener, less restful. When you finish, you step back, hands clasped. The king doesn't immediately get in. He studies the bed as though it's an adversary. Then finally he lies down, pulling the coverlet over his chest. Leave it, he mutters, when you reach to close the curtains. He wants the bed open tonight. You bow and withdraw to the shadows. The chamber is silent except for the crackle of the fire. The king's eyes remain open, fixed on some point above him, long after his breathing should have slowed into sleep. It's in that stillness you understand. The bedchamber may be the safest place in the palace, but it's also the one most easily breached. Not by weapons, but by trust. And when trust is gone, all that's left is a bed that smells of rosemary and the memory of who used to sleep beside it. It's nearing midnight, and the privy chamber is empty except for you, 2 other attendants, and the quiet weight of expectation. The king is in the great hall for a late feast, and the queen is nowhere near the royal apartments, gone to her own rooms after supper. That leaves the bed, perfectly made, waiting for an occupant who might not arrive for hours, if at all. Nights like this are dangerous because they're unpredictable. When the king does come, he could be sober and contemplative or flushed with wine and spoiling for company. Either way, the bed must be ready, not just to sleep in but to perform. Because sometimes the bedchamber becomes a stage, not for diplomacy or consummation, but for power plays no one dares to name outright. You've seen it before, a council meeting that somehow ends here, with the king leaning against the bedpost, one boot off, his councillors arrayed like awkward actors around the mattress. Or the opposite, when a royal snub takes the form of not inviting someone past the bedchamber threshold. Those moments cut deeper than public insults. Being kept outside is as good as being told you're irrelevant. Tonight, though, there's an unusual instruction from the Lord Chamberlain. The king's bed curtains are to be drawn open before his arrival. The pillows should be placed not in the usual parallel pair, but at opposite ends of the headboard. And, most curious of all, a silver basin should be set on the mattress itself, with a folded towel laid neatly beside it. You know what that means. There will be a ritual washing of hands before bed, a performance of purity. It's not common, but it's not unheard of when the king wishes to send a message that he ends his night clean. Who the message is for depends on who's watching. You prepare everything quickly, methodically, with the other attendants moving in silence. The basin is polished until it gleams in the candlelight. The towel is crisp and white, smelling faintly of thyme. The bed cover is smoothed to perfection, with no hint of the creases left from earlier inspections. When the king finally enters, the air changes instantly. He's not swaying or slurring, but there's a flush in his cheeks and a spark in his eye that suggests both wine and calculation. He strides straight to the bed, pausing only to acknowledge the basin with a faint smile. "We'll do it here," he says, voice low. One of the gentlemen pours warm water into the basin. The king dips his hands slowly, deliberately, letting the water run down his wrists before drying them on the towel. It's all done with the precision of a liturgy, every movement exaggerated just enough to be noticed. Then, without sitting on the bed, you begin speaking. Not to you, not to the attendants, but to the two councillors who have followed him in. The topic is treason, names are mentioned, territories, titles, accusations, all in the same calm tone he used to order his wine at supper. It's chilling, and you realize the entire hand-washing was a prelude to this conversation. A physical metaphor, the king cleansing himself of those who have soiled his reign. The councillors nod, murmur their agreements. They don't sit. No one sits. The bed stands between them, a soft barrier in a hard discussion. You stand still, eyes lowered, memorizing every name spoken. When the discussion ends, the councillors bow and leave. The king remains a moment longer, looking at the basin as though deciding whether to have it removed or leave it there. In the end, he gestures for it to be taken away. "Fresh sheets tomorrow," he adds, almost absently, before turning toward the inner dressing room. It's a curious thing. You've just witnessed what some historians would call a bedchamber council, though most of them imagine such meetings took place in the informal comfort. The king sprawled against pillows while advisors sat at his side. The reality is sharper, more deliberate. The bed is not a sofa. It's a throne in disguise, used when the king wants the intimacy of proximity without the openness of equality. There's a quirky precedent for this. You once read in the palace records about Henry VII, who reportedly kept a portable bed in his council chamber during long winter sessions. He never lay in it, but he would stand beside it while delivering decisions, perhaps as a reminder that he, unlike his councillors, was master of both waking and sleeping England. As you remove the basin and towel, the bed looks suddenly ordinary again. Just linen, pillows, a coverlet. The symbolic weight drains away, leaving only a place to sleep. Yet you know that tonight it served a different purpose, one the history books might reduce to a footnote if they mention it at all. You finish your duties and step back into the corridor, where the air is cooler and the sound of distant laughter from the great hall still lingers. Somewhere in the palace, the men whose names were spoken tonight may already feel a shift in the air without knowing why. And you think, if they could see the bed right now, perfectly made, they might not guess it had just been the most dangerous place in England. There's a kind of silence that doesn't just fill a room, it seals it. Tonight that silence hangs thick in the king's bedchamber, heavy as the velvet curtains and twice as suffocating. The fire has burned low, the candles are guttering bright, and every attendant except you has been dismissed. You're here because the Lord Chamberlain told you to stay until the king falls asleep. But you suspect the real reason is that no one else wanted to be this close when this happened. Because tonight is the king's last night in this bed. He's not dying, though the court whispers about his health more openly now. No, the move is political. Tomorrow he'll take up residence in new apartments, better suited to the dignity of his reign, as the official statement goes. But everyone knows what that really means. This chamber has been compromised. Not by enemies storming the gates, but by too many whispers behind the curtains, too many private moments gone sour, too many people who've stood where you're standing now. The bed has become tainted. You watch him as he sits at the edge of it, still in his hose and doublet, staring at nothing in particular. His hands rest on his knees, his shoulders slightly slumped. It's the posture of a man remembering, not battles or treaties, but nights, conversations in the dark, laughter that turned to suspicion, the smell of lavender one evening, rosemary another, people who entered by the main door and people who came in through the hidden ones. The mattress itself is new, replaced only last month after a bout of restless nights. The sheets are spotless, the pillows fluffed, but he isn't looking at those. His gaze lingers on the carved headboard, running along the deep grooves and faded gilding, like he's trying to read a history etched into the wood. You start to wonder how many secrets are hidden in this bed, not just in the woodwork, but in the fabric, in the stuffing. Beds in this court have witnessed more than the council chamber ever has. Alliances born and broken, heirs conceived and miscarried, promises whispered in the dark and rescinded at dawn. The king clears his throat and finally lies back. You move to draw the curtains, but he stops you with a wave. Leave them open, he says. The same words he used the night Cromwell's belongings were brought here. But this time his tone is different. Not wary, not defiant, just final. He rests his head on the pillow, eyes on the canopy above. Do you know, he says softly, almost to himself, this bed was the first thing I ordered after my coronation. You stay still, unsure if he expects an answer. He goes on. They told me the wood came from the same forest my father hunted in. Thought it would bring me luck. He lets out a short, humorless laugh. Perhaps it did. For a time. You've heard of kings and queens burning or gifting away old beds when they move chambers, claiming superstition or charity. But more often, the old bed is dismantled quietly, its pieces repurposed or stored out of sight. A royal bed isn't just furniture, it's a repository of memory. And sometimes those memories are too dangerous to keep intact. He turns onto his side, facing away from you, and within minutes his breathing slows. Not the deep, even breaths of true sleep, but something close enough. You take the opportunity to look around the chamber one last time. The bed dominates, of course, but you also notice the smaller details. The faint wear on the corner of the mattress from years of servants kneeling to adjust linens, the darker stain in the wood where countless hands have gripped the same post, the faint scent of rosewater lingering despite tonight's rosemary sachets. In the morning, the bed will be stripped before sunrise. The mattress will be sent to the laundresses, the frame dismantled. The work will be done quietly behind closed doors, so no one in the wider court will see the unmaking of a king's most private space. The new bed will be larger, grander, its posts higher, its curtains thicker. But it will be empty of history, at least until it begins to collect its own. You've been told you'll serve in the new chamber as well, and you're not sure how you feel about that. The bed you've tended for years will vanish into storerooms or workshops, perhaps becoming a bench in some distant hunting lodge or a table in a lesser palace. The thought is oddly sad. You've been part of its rituals, the folding, the scenting, the guarding. You've known the moods it held, the weight it bore. The king shifts slightly, murmurs something you can't catch, then settles again. You step back into the shadows, waiting until you're sure he's as close to asleep as he's going to get. Tomorrow, this bed will be gone, and the palace will carry on, as it always does, pretending that beds are just for sleeping, and not the silent witnesses to the rise and fall of empires. When you finally slip out of the room, you glance back once. The fire is nearly out, the curtains hang still, and the king lies alone under a coverlet that will never touch him again. The door closes with a sound softer than breath. So here we are, at the end of 30 nights in the Tudor royal bedchambers, Rooms that were never really about rest. You've crossed polished floors in velvet silence, carried linens like state documents, and stood close enough to hear secrets that could change the fate of a kingdom. You've learned that the bed wasn't just a place for sleep or for love. It was a throne in disguise, a council table in soft furnishings, a confessional with curtains. Think of everything those rooms have seen. The grooms of the Stool, with their absurd-sounding title and absolute access to the monarch's most private moments. The Queen's confinements, where childbirth was a political event wrapped in darkness and whispers. The morning gifts, bright and glittering, handed over as public proof of a night that may or may not have happened. And all the times the bed became a stage for foreign envoys, political enemies, or personal betrayals. You've seen the way bedding could be a message. New sheets to mark a fall from grace, embroidered pillowcases to signal a shift in allegiance, the faint scent of a mistress in the king's pillows. Even the pest told stories here, every bite an opportunity for someone to lay blame. And the architecture itself helped. Hidden doors, secret passages, layouts designed to allow intimacy and intrigue without leaving a trace. The scholars will write about battles, treaties, and parliaments, but you now know that the real currents of power often ran under coverlets and through bed curtains. In these chambers, proximity was currency. A servant with the right to fold a royal nightshirt might have more influence than a distant earl. A lady-in-waiting who brushed the Queen's hair could tip the scales of policy with a few well-chosen words. And in the end, even kings could be driven from their own beds, when trust curdled, when memories weighed too heavily, or when a chamber became too full of ghosts. Furniture could be dismantled, linens burned, rooms abandoned, but the residue of what happened there would cling like perfume on the air. So now, as you leave this story, imagine yourself stepping back into the cool, torch-lit corridors of the palace. The door to the royal bedchamber closes behind you. Inside, the fire dims, the coverlet lies smooth, and the room settles into the heavy quiet of a space that never truly sleeps. Somewhere beyond those walls, the court is still awake, plotting, watching, listening. And maybe, just maybe, you've started to see how the real history of the Tudors was written not only in ink, but in thread, and whispered in the dark between the sheets. Sweet dreams.